The morning Nathaniel Whitmore buried his father, he stood alone at the grave and made a vow no one was meant to hear. "I will never become you," he said it quietly, the way a man speaks when the wound is too deep for witnesses. 3 years later, standing in the grand hallway of Whitmore Estate, his mother placed a list of eligible women on the table in front of him, and Nathaniel said the only thing he knew how to say anymore. I shall never marry. If this story moves you, subscribe, stay until the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Virginia, summer of 1819. The list sat on the dining table like a sentence handed down by a judge. 8 names, 8 daughters of 8 wealthy Virginia families. Each one written in his mother's careful script, as though the neatness of the handwriting might make the whole arrangement feel less like a transaction. Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the far end of the table and did not sit down. He had learned long ago that sitting at this table meant agreeing to what was served. "You haven't even looked at them," Margaret Whitmore said. She was 58 years old, still handsome, in the way that women who had once been beautiful and never quite let go of it remain handsome. She sat with her spine straight, her tea untouched, her eyes watching her son the way a woman watches the sky before a storm, not afraid exactly, but braced. "I don't need to look at them, Nathaniel, Mother." He said her name the same way she said his. Like punctuation, Margaret pressed her lips together. "The estate is not what it was. Your father left debts that are not small. The Halverson account alone, I know the accounts. Then you know we cannot sustain this house without selling me." He said it without bitterness. That was the part that always surprised her. Not angry. Not wounded, just flat, like a man describing weather. Margaret set her teacup down with a small click. That is an ugly way to say it. It is an honest way to say it. Nathaniel finally moved, stepping toward the window instead of the table. Outside, the late summer fields stretched in every direction, green going gold at the edges, sky wide and blue and indifferent. He had grown up looking at that view and believing it meant something. That the land, the house, the name, that all of it was solid. Permanent. He knew better now. Father chose wealth over everything else in this house, he said, his voice still measured, still controlled. I watched what that looked like for 30 years. I watched what it did to this family, to you. He turned then, just enough to look at her. I will not repeat it. I am not asking you to repeat it. I am asking you to be practical. Practical, he almost smiled. Almost. You mean I should choose Eleanor Hayes because her father owns half of Richmond, and the other half would come to us upon marriage. Eleanor is a fine woman, I have no doubt she is. She is educated, she is well regarded, she would be an arrangement. Nathaniel turned fully from the window. And I will not arrange myself into a marriage, Mother. Not for the estate, not for the name, not for any of it. He picked up his hat from the sideboard. I shall never marry. I said it last month, I said it the month before. I am saying it again now, and I would appreciate it very much if this particular conversation could finally rest. Margaret watched him walk toward the door. Your father said the same thing once, she said quietly. Nathaniel stopped. He was 26. He told his own mother he would never marry for anything less than love. She paused. He was married within the year, for the estate, for the name. Another pause. You are not so different from him as you believe, Nathaniel. He did not answer. He walked out. The door to the study closed behind him with more force than he intended, which bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He prided himself on control, on steadiness, on the appearance of a man who had already decided everything important and found the rest beneath consideration. Thomas Reed was waiting in the hall. Thomas had been the head steward of Whitmore Estate since before Nathaniel could read. He was a lean, quiet man of 60, with the kind of face that gave nothing away unless he chose to give it. He had served Nathaniel's father faithfully for decades and had transferred that fidelity to the son without drama or ceremony, the way a good man carries responsibility, not because he is told to, but because he knows it matters. The new staff arrived this morning, Thomas said, falling into step beside Nathaniel without being invited. That was another thing about Thomas. He moved as though he belonged wherever he stood. How many? 4. 3 from the Hargrove Agency in Richmond. 1 came independently, a Miss Clara Bellamy, no formal agency. She carried a letter of reference from a Mrs. Ida Calloway of Fredericksburg. Do we know Mrs. Calloway? We do not, but the letter was specific and detailed. Miss Bellamy worked 4 years in the Calloway household. Managed linens, garment preservation, household scheduling. Thomas paused for just a fraction of a second. Mrs. Calloway wrote that she was sorry to lose her. Nathaniel said nothing. I placed her in the East Wing, Thomas continued. She will handle the upper household linens and storage. Fine. Nathaniel pushed open the door to the stable yard, needing air that did not smell of his mother's tea and his family's expectations. Is there anything else? Thomas considered the question with his usual measured gravity. No, sir, then we are finished. Thomas inclined his head slightly. Not quite a bow, never quite a bow, more like a man acknowledging a statement he is not entirely sure he agrees with. Clara Bellamy arrived at Whitmore Estate carrying 1 suitcase, 1 sewing box, and the particular kind of stillness that belongs only to people who have learned that drawing attention to yourself rarely ends well. She was 25 years old and had been working in other people's houses since she was 15. Not because she had been given no choice, she had choices, the kind that come from being born into a family of modest dignity and careful habits, but because she had understood early that independence required income. And income required usefulness, and she had made herself useful in the most particular way she knew. She understood cloth. Most people did not truly understand this. They thought it was simple fabric, thread, color, cut. They thought a good seamstress was a woman with quick fingers and a steady hand. But Clara had been taught by her mother, who had been taught by her grandmother, and what she understood was not just the mechanics of cloth, but the nature of it. How certain fibers breathed and others suffocated. How sunlight destroyed silk in a way that candle flame did not. How the wrong storage method could render a 10-year-old garment unwearable in 2 seasons, while the right method could preserve something fragile across an entire generation. She had saved 3 wedding gowns, 2 military uniforms, and 1 christening dress in the 4 years she spent with Mrs. Calloway. She did not say any of this when Thomas Reed met her at the servants' entrance and led her through the East Wing corridor. She said, "Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the position." Thomas looked at her for a moment in the way that careful people look at things they are not yet ready to name. Then he said, "We keep strict hours here, meals at 6:12 and 6. The household staff answers to me. Mr. Whitmore does not involve himself in staff management, and you are not to involve yourself in matters above your station." Yes, sir, the linen stores are in considerable disarray. The previous woman who managed them left without much notice. I understand. There is more in the East storage room than anyone has catalogued in some years. I cannot tell you what is there because I do not know. Clara nodded once. I'll find out. Something in the way she said it, not a promise, not a boast, just a straightforward statement of what she would do, made Thomas pause again. Then he handed her the key ring and walked away. The East storage room was exactly what Thomas had warned her it would be. Or rather, it was worse. Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment, holding her lamp, looking at what 3 years of neglect had done to what must have once been a carefully ordered system. Trunks stacked without inventory, fabric bundles wrapped in the wrong materials. A shelf of gowns exposed to a small window that let in the kind of afternoon light that accelerated fading. Dust on everything, not the soft drift of recent dust, but the settled, patient dust of things that had been forgotten. She did not sigh, she did not exclaim. She set the lamp on a flat surface, put on her apron, and started. She did not intend to work past midnight that first night. She did not intend for Thomas Reed to find her. When he made his final round of the house at 11:30, still on her knees in front of a cedar chest she had discovered, shoved beneath a shelf, carefully lifting the contents into the light. Miss Bellamy. She looked up. Mr. Reed, it is nearly midnight. Yes, sir. He looked at the neat piles she had arranged around her. The careful groupings, damaged but salvageable, damaged and not salvageable, intact, unknown condition. the small notebook open on the floor, where she had been keeping inventory in a handwriting that was clear and orderly. "What is in the chest?" he asked, despite himself. "I'm not entirely sure yet." She turned back to it, lifting a layer of old linen with both hands. "But I think yes." She went still for a moment and then said more quietly, "This is a wedding gown. It is very old. The lace is Brussels needlepoint. It's been stored incorrectly. Someone used cedar shavings directly against it, and there is some damage to the bodice from the oils, but the main structure is intact." Thomas took a step forward, which he had not meant to do. In his 40 years of service to the Whitmore family, he had never heard a servant describe a forgotten garment in the east storage room with the same quiet attention a doctor gives to a patient. As though the thing in her hands had value not because of what it was worth, but because it had existed long enough to deserve care. "Whose was it?" he asked. "I don't know," Clara said. "There's no inventory tag. But the needlework on the bodice here, look." She held the lamp closer, revealing a pattern of small flowers stitched into the collar. "Mid-last century, maybe older." She paused. "You might know Mr. Reed. Did any of the Whitmore women marry before 1780? Thomas stared at the gown for a moment. Then something moved across his face that Clara could not quite read. "Nathaniel's grandmother," he said slowly. "Catherine Whitmore. She died in 1791. Clara looked down at the gown. "Then this is hers," she said. Quietly, not dramatically, just as a statement of something that had been true for many years without anyone knowing it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You should rest, Miss Bellamy. There will be time tomorrow." "Yes, sir." She began gently folding the gown back into its wrappings, but with different paper this time acid-free, from her own supply, because she had learned to carry it. "Good night, Mr. Reed." Thomas walked back down the hall. He stopped once near the turning and looked back at the line of lamplight under the storage room door. Then he walked on. Nathaniel did not know about the storage room. He did not know about the gown. What he knew about Clara Bellamy 1 week after her arrival was essentially nothing. He had passed her twice in the corridor, once in the morning, when she was carrying an armload of linen toward the laundry, and once in the late afternoon when she was moving a small table from one end of the east hall to another. Apparently without assistance, apparently without strain, apparently without any awareness that she was doing something a woman her size was not expected to be doing alone. He had almost said something on that second occasion. Something like, "Can I help you with that?" Which would have been strange. Which would have been the kind of thing that a man of his position did not say to a housemaid he had hired less than 7 days ago. He didn't say it. He kept walking. But he found himself thinking about it later, which bothered him considerably, because he did not understand why. The morning everything changed started with Thomas. Thomas came to Nathaniel's study at 8:15, which was unusual. Thomas typically managed the household so that it ran without requiring Nathaniel's attention before 10. "There is something you should see, sir." Nathaniel looked up from his ledger. "Is something broken? Has someone left?" "No, sir." "Then what? It would be better to show you." A pause. "Please." Thomas did not say please often. It was not a request. It was something more than that. Nathaniel closed the ledger. The east storage room looked nothing like it had the previous week. Nathaniel knew this because he had looked in there perhaps twice in his adult life, once when he was a boy exploring places he was not supposed to explore, and once last year when he had briefly entertained the idea of converting it to additional study space. Both times the room had been a chaos of accumulated decades. Now it was ordered, not just cleaned ordered. A system had been imposed. The shelves held neatly wrapped bundles, each labeled in small clear handwriting. The trunks had been opened, sorted, and their contents catalogued in a register that sat open on the central work table. The light from the single window, which was now covered with a piece of thin muslin, filtering rather than blocking, fell soft and even across the room. Clara Bellamy stood at the work table with her back to the door, making a notation in the register. She did not hear them enter. Nathaniel was about to say something when Thomas stepped beside him and pointed silently at the table to the left of the work table. There was a gown laid out there. He walked toward it without thinking. He did not know cloth. He could not have told you the difference between silk and brocade at 20 paces. But he recognized this gown the way you recognize a face from a portrait you have seen hanging in a house your entire life, not consciously, not from detailed study, but from years of passing the same image in the same hallway until it became part of how the house looked to you. He had seen this gown in the portrait of his grandmother Catherine. The one that hung in the upstairs gallery, the one he had walked past 3,000 times without stopping. Where did you find this? His voice came out different than he expected. Quieter. Clara turned. She had the particular quality of stillness that some people have, not stillness of body so much as stillness of self. She looked at him without starting, without the quick downturn of eyes that most of the staff used when he entered a room. Not insolent, just steady. In the cedar chest under the south shelf, she said. It had been incorrectly stored. There was some damage, but the structure is intact. The needlepoint on the bodice is original. It's my grandmother's, he said. Yes, sir, Mr. Reed told me. I wasn't certain when I found it. Nathaniel looked at the gown for a long moment. Something moved through him that he did not immediately know the name of. Something that was not quite grief and not quite anything else. More like the feeling of finding something you did not know you had lost. Can it be preserved? It already has been. Clara moved to the table, and her hands moved over the gown with a matter-of-fact confidence that stopped him. I removed the cedar residue, treated the oil damage on the bodice here. She indicated a section near the collar without touching it. It won't fully recover, but it won't deteriorate further. I've wrapped it in acid-free paper and muslin. If it's stored correctly from now on, it should last another 50 years without significant additional damage. You know how to do that, Nathaniel said. Not a question. An observation. Yes, sir. Where did you learn? Something shifted in her expression, not exactly discomfort, but a kind of careful attention, as though she was deciding what the question actually meant before answering it. My mother taught me, she said, and her mother before her. It's not common knowledge. Most houses don't bother with preservation, they replace what deteriorates. A small pause. The Whitmore collection is extensive. A lot of it has been left alone long enough to reach the point of deterioration. Some of it is already beyond saving. She picked up the register from the work table and held it out to him. I've cataloged what's here. I separated it into 3 categories. The third column is a list of what can be preserved with proper attention. The second is what's already damaged but stable. The first. She paused, and for just a fraction of a second, he thought he saw something in her face that might have been regret. The first column is what is already lost. Nathaniel took the register. He was not a man who was often surprised. He had arranged his life with considerable care to minimize the occurrence of surprise. He knew the accounts of this estate to within $20. He knew the names and histories of every family of consequence in the county. He knew what his mother wanted, what Eleanor Hayes's father wanted, what the creditors in Richmond wanted. He was not prepared for a housemaid who had spent days in an abandoned storage room and produced, without being asked, a better record of his family's history than he possessed himself. He looked up from the register. Clara was watching him with that same steady quality, not waiting for praise, not angling for recognition. Just watching the way a person watches when they want to know if the information has been understood. This is good work, he said. Thank you, sir. Did Thomas ask you to do this? No, sir. Did anyone? No, sir. The answer sat there between them. Nathaniel closed the register and held it back out to her. Keep it, he said. This should stay with the collection. Something small moved in her expression, almost like surprise but quieter. She took the register. Is there anything else in this wing that requires attention? He asked. Yes, she said, and he heard the very slight change in her voice, the small intake, before she said something she was not entirely sure would be welcomed. The servants' quarters on the east side have a drainage problem. The floor is taking moisture. It will damage the wood, and in 3 seasons the rot will spread to the main structure. Nathaniel blinked. The servants' quarters, he repeated. Yes, sir. You have been here 6 days. Yes, sir. And in 6 days you have cataloged the East storage room, preserved a 200-year-old wedding gown, and identified a structural problem in the servants' wing? Clara did not flinch. I notice things, she said simply. I don't mean to overstep. You're not overstepping. He said it quickly and then paused because the quickness of it surprised him. He cleared his throat. I'll have Thomas look at the drainage. I can show him where— Yes, do that. He walked out. In the hallway he stopped for a moment. He was not sure what had just happened. He was fairly certain something had. 3 days later, Eleanor Hayes arrived for tea. She came with her mother, Mrs. Ruth Hayes, a woman of sharp intelligence wrapped in considerable social ceremony, and she came wearing a blue silk gown that would have made most of the rooms in Whitmore Estate look underdressed in comparison. Eleanor was 31. She had been presented at 17, had declined 2 proposals since then, and was not, as far as Nathaniel could tell, particularly interested in becoming Mrs. Whitmore. What she seemed to be interested in was books, agricultural economics, and very good tea. He respected her for all 3 of these things and felt absolutely nothing else. His mother sat at the head of the table with the particular brightness that she reserved for moments when she was trying to seem natural. Nathaniel tells me you've been expanding the east side of the Hayes property, Margaret said to Mrs. Hayes. We have. Clarence put in an additional orchard last year. It was a considerable investment, but the yield has already proved it worthwhile, Mrs. Hayes set her cup down. Are you considering anything similar? I understood the Whitmore fields have been contracted the same way for some years. We are always looking at improvements, Margaret said smoothly. Nathaniel drank his tea and looked out the window. Eleanor, seated across from him, watched him with the mild alertness of someone who has observed a great many people and reached a great many accurate conclusions. You look, she said quietly, during a lull in their mother's conversation, like a man who is somewhere else entirely. Nathaniel looked at her. I apologize, he said. Don't. She settled back slightly in her chair. I feel exactly the same way, if I'm honest. This visit wasn't my idea. Nor mine. They considered each other for a moment. The particular understanding of 2 people who have been positioned across a table from each other, by mothers who have decided what they mean to each other, and who have not been consulted in the matter. You've made improvements in the East Wing, Eleanor said, shifting to something easier. Your steward mentioned it when we came in. A new member of staff? A housemaid, Nathaniel said. She has some skill with preservation. Textile storage, unusual skill for a housemaid. Yes, Eleanor tilted her head slightly. She had her mother's sharpness but deployed it with less ceremony. You said that differently than you said the rest of it. Nathaniel set his cup down. I don't know what you mean. Eleanor smiled, small and private. No, she agreed. I expect you don't. That evening Nathaniel went back to the East Wing. He told himself he was checking on the drainage situation. Thomas had arranged for a man to look at the floor, and it was reasonable to verify the assessment. He did not find Thomas. He found Clara, at the end of the hall near the servants' staircase, sitting on an upturned crate with a garment across her knees, working on it by the light of a lamp she had hung from a hook on the wall. She was stitching something at the hem. Her hands moved with the steady rhythm of someone doing something they have done so often that the body has memorized it. She looked up when she heard him, Mr. Whitmore. She started to rise, but he gestured briefly, and she settled again, her hands pausing over the work. Sit, he said. I didn't come to interrupt you. He looked at the garment. What is that? One of the maids tore her dress on a nail in the laundry, Clara said. It's a small repair. Is that your responsibility? She considered this. It wasn't assigned to me, if that's what you mean. She went back to stitching. But she's newer here than I am, and she couldn't afford to replace it, and the tear was in an obvious place. Nathaniel leaned against the wall and crossed his arms, not defensively, but in the way of a man who intends to stay for a moment, and is arranging himself accordingly. Do you always do things that aren't assigned to you? He asked. Clara thought about it the way she thought about most things, actually, before answering. I do what seems necessary, she said finally. If it falls inside what I've been hired to do, it gets done in the regular way. If it doesn't, a small shrug, it still gets done. Why? She looked up at him, and there was a directness in it that was not disrespectful but was also not the careful deflection most of his staff employed when he asked them something real. Because someone should, she said. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. You told me you noticed things, he said. Yes, sir. What have you noticed about this house? It was a strange question to ask a housemaid. He was aware of that. He asked it anyway. Clara's hand stilled over the stitching. She looked at the lamp flame for a moment, not evasively but consideringly, like a person taking the question seriously enough to find the right words. This house has been beautiful for a long time, she said. And it still is. But it's been managed the way beautiful things sometimes are maintained on the surface and left to deteriorate underneath. A pause. The staff work hard. They work harder than most, actually. But they work without direction and without recognition. And people who work that way eventually work only hard enough to keep their position. Not harder, she looked at him. The East storage room sat as it was for years. Not because no one had time to address it, because no one believed it mattered. Nathaniel did not speak. The house matters, Clara said. The things in it matter. The people keeping it running matter. She went back to her stitching. I don't think they've been told that in some time. The lamplight moved on the wall. Outside the window, the Virginia summer dark was complete and warm and full of cricket sound. My father managed this house for 30 years, Nathaniel said slowly. He was very good at it, very efficient. Clara said nothing. Waiting. He was very good at keeping things looking as they should. Nathaniel looked at his hands for a moment. I came home from school when I was 12 and found my mother crying in this hallway. Not the kind of crying that means something has just happened. The kind that means it has been happening for a long time. He paused. I asked her what was wrong. She said, nothing. Your father manages everything. We want for nothing. Clara's hands had gone still again. She was right, Nathaniel said. We wanted for nothing. Materially, the house was always beautiful. The accounts were always in order. He looked up. I never saw my father speak to my mother the way you just spoke about the people in this house. As though they mattered independent of their function. The words sat between them in the warm dark. Clara looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, not cold, but measured. That must have been a very quiet kind of lonely, she said. Nathaniel looked at her. He had not expected that. He had expected sympathy of the formal kind, I'm sorry, sir, deflection, or the careful blankness that most people used when he said anything real. He had not expected someone to name it. Yes, he said after a moment. It was. Clara nodded once, the way someone nods when they recognize something they have also known. Not commiserating, just acknowledging. Then she went back to her stitching. And for reasons he could not immediately account for, Nathaniel Whitmore stood in the East Wing corridor for another 20 minutes, not saying much. Not doing anything in particular, just occupying the same space as the quiet new maid who noticed things, and finding that for the first time in a long time, a room in his own house felt like somewhere he could stay. He walked back to his study eventually. He sat at his desk. He looked at the list of 8 names his mother had placed on the dining table. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the drawer. He was not ready to think about what that meant, but something in him, the part that had been flat and settled for so long that he had stopped feeling it, had shifted. Like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. And though he would not have admitted it to anyone, not Thomas, not his mother, certainly not himself, in the full light of day he sat at that desk for a long time, not reading, not writing, not working. Just thinking about what it felt like when someone looked at a thing that had been neglected and said, it still matters. Someone should care for it. And wondering, without quite knowing he was wondering, if anyone had ever said that about him. The morning after Nathaniel stood in that East Wing corridor longer than he had any reason to, he made a decision. He would not go back, not to that hallway, not to that lamplight. Not to whatever it was that had happened when Clara Bellamy looked at him and used the word lonely, like she already knew what it felt like from the inside. He was a man of principle. He had built his entire adult life on the architecture of principle. Principles did not bend for housemaids who stitched other women's dresses by lamplight and said things that stayed with you past midnight. He ate breakfast alone, answered 3 letters from Richmond, reviewed the drainage report Thomas had left on his desk, and did not think about Clara Bellamy once. This was completely untrue. He thought about her approximately 11 times before 10 o'clock, and each time he filed the thought away under a category he labeled irrelevant, which is what men do when something is the opposite of irrelevant, and they are not ready to admit it. What kept surfacing was not her face, though he had noticed her face, which was a fact he was also filing under irrelevant, but the quality of her attention. The way she had listened to him talk about his father without offering him sympathy he hadn't asked for. The way she had named what he'd described without softening it or dressing it in the kind of polite language people used when they didn't want to say the true thing. A quiet kind of lonely. He pushed his chair back from the desk and went to find Thomas. Thomas was in the butler's pantry reviewing the week's supply accounts, which he always did on Thursdays, with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. He looked up when Nathaniel entered, and his expression said, without words, that he had been expecting this visit without knowing exactly what shape it would take. The drainage problem in the East Servants' Wing, Nathaniel said. What was the assessment? Significant, Thomas said. The subfloor has absorbed moisture across approximately 14 feet. If it's left another season, we will be looking at structural repairs rather than preventive ones. How much? Thomas named a figure. Nathaniel absorbed it. Not the way a man absorbs bad news, but the way a man absorbs information he has already partially accepted. And Miss Bellamy found this in her first week. She did. Was she trained in structural assessment? Thomas considered the question with what might have been, on a different face, a suppressed expression of amusement. She was not, as far as I know. She noticed it because the floor felt different when she walked on it. She said the sound was wrong. The sound, her words, sir. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Authorize the repair, he said. And Thomas, has she submitted any other observations, in writing or otherwise? Thomas opened the middle drawer of the pantry desk and produced a folded sheet of paper. She left this yesterday morning. I was going to bring it to you this afternoon. Nathaniel took it. It was a list. Clara's handwriting, he recognized it now from the storage room register, small and clean and without flourish. 7 items. The drainage problem he already knew about. A window seal in the north hall that was failing and would allow water damage by winter. A problem with the chimney flue in the second-floor sitting room that was creating backdraft. A section of the kitchen garden wall that was separating from its foundation. And 3 items at the bottom that were not structural. A note that the household inventory of winter linens was insufficient for the staff quarters. A notation that the candles being purchased for the servants' areas were of a quality that burned unevenly and created a fire hazard, and a single line at the very bottom that read, "The library shelves on the east wall receive direct afternoon light. The older volumes are fading. A curtain treatment would cost little and preserve considerable." Nathaniel read the list twice. Then he said, "When did you know she was different?" Thomas did not pretend to misunderstand the question. "The first night," he said, "when she was in the storage room at midnight cataloging a wedding gown no one had looked at in 40 years. A pause. She wasn't doing it to be noticed, that was the thing. She didn't know I had come by. She was doing it because the gown was there and it needed doing." Nathaniel folded the list and put it in his coat pocket. "I want weekly reports," he said, "whatever she observes." "Whatever she flags," Thomas nodded once. But as Nathaniel turned to go, the older man said, with the particular careful evenness of someone choosing their words, "She is good at her position, sir. I would not want her to feel that she has been elevated into something different without her consent." Nathaniel stopped. He turned back. "What do you mean?" "Only that she came here to do a job," Thomas said. "She does it exceptionally, but she is a private person and she has." He paused with the slight hesitation of a man who is about to say something true and is checking the truth of it before he releases it. She has a kind of dignity about her that I have not seen in a long while. I would not want the house's attention to disturb it." The sentence landed in the room and sat there. Nathaniel looked at Thomas for a long moment. Thomas looked back with the equanimity of a man who has served one family for 40 years and earned the right to say uncomfortable things. "Understood," Nathaniel said. He walked out. He was already thinking about the library curtains. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, 2 things happened in the Whitmore household that no one fully understood and everyone noticed. The first was that the library east wall shelves received a curtain treatment. Thomas arranged it on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon the oldest volumes on those shelves were no longer taking afternoon sun. It cost very little. The effect was immediate. 3 of the upstairs maids noticed it before noon. None of them knew why it had been done, but there was a particular kind of attention that moves through a household when someone in authority notices something small and acts on it, a shift in temperature, almost. The way a room feels different when a window that has been stuck for years is finally opened. The second thing was that Clara did not know Nathaniel had ordered it. She went into the library on Wednesday afternoon to return 2 books she had borrowed from the lower shelves. She had asked Thomas's permission, which Thomas had granted without making it a formal occasion, and she stopped when she saw the curtains. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she walked to the shelves, ran 2 fingers along the spine of the oldest volume she could identify, and checked the temperature of the binding the way she had been taught to do. Not warm. Protected. She turned around. Nathaniel was standing at his desk across the room, apparently reading something, apparently not watching her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. He looked up with what was, she suspected, a practiced air of distraction. "Miss Bellamy, the curtains," she said, "for the shelves." Thomas arranged it. "Yes, sir." She paused. "On your instruction, I imagine." He looked at her for a moment. There was something in the air between them, not quite challenge, not quite acknowledgement. More like 2 people deciding at the same time how honest they were willing to be. "You mentioned it in your list," he said. "I didn't think it would be acted on so quickly." "Why not?" She thought about that. "In my experience, small things take longer. People address what is urgent, what is merely important waits." "And you thought library shelves were merely important?" "I thought they were important," she said carefully. "I wasn't sure anyone else would." He set down whatever he had been reading. "What else on your list do you think will wait?" She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at him with that steady quality, assessing, but not aggressively. The way a person looks at something when they are trying to determine if it is what it appears to be. "The kitchen garden wall," she said finally, "and the winter linen shortage." "Why those? The wall requires physical labor and some cost. People avoid authorizing that unless the problem is visible and immediate." She folded her hands. "The linen shortage affects only the servants' quarters. That kind of thing typically waits until someone complains, and the staff here doesn't seem to be in the habit of complaining." The last sentence arrived with a directness that Nathaniel felt more than heard. He picked it up and turned it over. "You're telling me my staff doesn't feel they can speak up," he said. "I'm telling you they don't," she said. "I don't know if that's a feeling or a fact, but the result is the same." Nathaniel was quiet. "Authorize the linen order," he said to the air, not quite to himself. Then more directly, "Thomas will handle it. If there are other deficiencies in the staff quarters, bring them to him." "Yes, sir." She turned to go. "Miss Bellamy," she turned back. "The books," he said, and nodded at what she had in her hands, the 2 volumes she had returned. "Did you find what you were looking for?" She looked down at them as though she had momentarily forgotten she was holding them. "The second one, yes. The first was not what I expected." "What were you looking for?" "Agricultural methods for the preservation of plant-based dyes." A pause that might, on someone less composed, have been slightly self-conscious. "For the textiles. Some of the older fabrics in the storage room use vegetable dyes that fade differently than mineral-based ones. I wanted to understand the source better so I could advise on storage conditions more accurately." Nathaniel looked at her. "There is a newer volume," he said after a moment. Third shelf from the top, east section, 8 in from the left. Published in 1814. It covers exactly what you're describing. She looked at the shelf. I didn't know it was there. Most people don't. My father purchased it and never opened it. He crossed the room, reached past her, not close, but close enough that she stepped back by instinct and pulled the volume free. He held it out. You can borrow it. She took it without looking at it. She was looking at him. Thank you, sir, she said. But the way she said it was not the standard acknowledgement of a servant accepting something from her employer. It was the way a person says thank you when they mean it, and they want the other person to know they mean it directly, without elaboration. Nathaniel took a step back and returned to his desk. He stared at the papers in front of him for a solid 5 minutes without reading a single word. The trouble started with a woman named Harriet Doyle. Harriet was one of the 3 maids who had come from the Hargrove agency in Richmond. She was competent, experienced, and had a very precise sense of hierarchy that she had developed over 20 years of household service. Hierarchies were important to Harriet. They told you where you stood and what you could expect from where you stood, and anything that disrupted them was, in Harriet's considered view, a problem. Clara Bellamy was a problem, not because Clara was unkind, she was not. Not because Clara was arrogant, she was not that either. Clara was the particular kind of problem that was difficult to articulate and therefore impossible to formally object to. She was quiet, efficient, respectful, and she had somehow in 3 weeks become the person Thomas Reed consulted first when he needed something done in the household that crossed multiple areas of responsibility. Which meant she had authority she had not been formally given. Which meant the hierarchy had shifted without anyone announcing it. On a Thursday morning in the kitchen before breakfast, Harriet made her position clear. Clara was at the work table sorting linen counts. She had come down early as she usually did, and was working her way through the winter inventory she had been authorized to conduct. Agnes, the youngest of the kitchen maids, 17 years old, shy in the particular way of girls who have been told too many times that they are in the way, was helping her. Harriet came in, took one look at the scene, and said, "Agnes doesn't belong to the linen department." Clara looked up. She volunteered. She has kitchen duties. I checked with Mrs. Holt. The kitchen is fully covered this morning. Harriet was quiet for a beat that was precisely long enough to signal that she had not been answered to her satisfaction. "You've been here less than a month," she said. "You should not be redirecting staff." Clara set down the linen she was holding. She did not raise her voice. She did not, to her credit, do any of the things that a woman who wanted to escalate the situation would have done. "You're right that I haven't been here long," she said. "I should have asked Mrs. Holt directly in front of you, so there was no confusion about the chain of authorization. That was careless of me, and I'll remember it," which was on the surface a completely reasonable and conciliatory statement, and which also neatly removed every leg of Harriet's objection by acknowledging the form of the problem without accepting the substance of it. Agnes had gone very still and was staring at her linen inventory with the concentration of someone who wishes profoundly to be invisible. Harriet looked at Clara for a long moment. "You are not what you appear," Harriet said, finally, and it came out with less certainty than she had intended. "I'm a housemaid who is trying to do her job," Clara said. "Same as you." Harriet left. Clara went back to the linen count. Agnes waited approximately 45 seconds, then said in a very small voice, "She doesn't like you." "I know," Clara said. "Does it bother you?" Clara considered this with the kind of honesty she brought to most things. "A little," she said, "but not enough to change how I work." Agnes absorbed this. Then after another pause, "How do you do that?" "Do what? Not get smaller?" Agnes looked at the table. "When someone comes in like that and looks at you that way." "Most people get smaller." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I learned," she said simply, "that getting smaller doesn't make people treat you bigger. So I stopped." Agnes looked at her like someone who had just been handed a key they didn't know they needed. Thomas heard about the kitchen exchange by noon. This was not unusual. Thomas heard about most things that happened in the household within a few hours of their occurring. It was less a matter of surveillance than of the particular awareness that came from 40 years of knowing which walls in a house were thin. He found Nathaniel in the stable yard in the early afternoon and delivered a summary with his usual economy. "There was a disagreement in the kitchen this morning," he said, "between Miss Harriet Doyle and Miss Bellamy." Nathaniel looked up from the horse he had been examining. "What kind of disagreement?" "The kind that occurs when a household's informal hierarchy adjusts faster than its formal one." Thomas paused. "Miss Bellamy handled it well. But I think you should know that her position here is becoming something slightly different from what we hired her to perform." "Different how?" "The staff listen to her," Thomas said. "Not because she asks them to, because she has given them reasons to." He folded his hands in front of him. "The drainage problem she identified has been authorized for repair. The linen order has been placed. The library shelves have been addressed. The staff see that she brought these things forward, and they were acted on. They understand, whether consciously or not, that she carries a kind of weight in this house." Nathaniel was quiet. "And Harriet Doyle objects to this," he said. "Harriet Doyle has been the most senior member of the household staff for 6 years," Thomas said. "She is very good at her job. She is less good at adapting when the situation shifts." "Do I need to address it formally?" Thomas considered. "Not yet. But I think you should know that Miss Bellamy's position here may require clarification before long. For her protection as much as anything else." Nathaniel looked out across the stable yard. "What would she want, do you think?" It was a strange question for an employer to ask about a housemaid. Thomas answered it, without remarking on the strangeness. "I think she would want to be left alone to work," he said. "I think she would find a formal acknowledgement of her authority, however well-intended, uncomfortable." "Why?" "Because she understands that authority which comes from title can be taken away with title. What she has now cannot be. A pause, she has earned it." "That is a different thing." Nathaniel absorbed that. He thought about his father and the way authority in this house had once moved downward, from title, from money, from the weight of a name. The way it had produced perfect surface results and profound interior erosion. He thought about a woman who had been here 3 weeks and had already changed the temperature of this house in ways he could feel but could not precisely measure. "Tell Harriet Doyle," he said slowly, "that she is valued. Specifically, tell her what she does well and tell her I know it. Don't make it about Miss Bellamy." Thomas looked at him with something that was as close to surprise as Thomas ever got. "That is," he paused. "A good approach, sir. Is it unusual that I would think of it?" "It is unusual," Thomas said carefully, "that anyone would." That Sunday the minister at the county church gave a sermon about judgment. Nathaniel was not particularly interested in sermons. He went because his family had always gone, and because not going would require more explanation than going. And because the pew his grandfather had built into the east side of the church still had the Whitmore name on a small brass plate, and ignoring it felt like a different kind of statement than he was prepared to make. His mother sat beside him. She had recovered from the dinner argument with the specific resilience of women who have been losing certain battles for so long that they have learned to treat each defeat as merely temporary. Eleanor Hayes was 2 pews forward with her mother. She turned once and caught his eye and gave him a look of such cheerful commiseration that he almost smiled. What he was actually thinking about was not the sermon. He was thinking about something Clara had said in the library. "In my experience, small things take longer. People address what is urgent. What is merely important waits." And then he was thinking about what that meant for a person. A person who was merely important, a person who was not urgent. Who could wait? He was thinking about all the people in his house, not the furniture, not the accounts, not the structure, who had been waiting for someone to notice that they mattered, and who had learned over years to work without that acknowledgement because it was not coming and they needed to eat. He was thinking about his mother in this pew, for 30 years, beside a man who ran a beautiful house and treated the woman who lived in it like one of the well-maintained fixtures. He was thinking about the fact that Clara Bellamy had identified all of this in 3 weeks and said it plainly, without accusation, in a corridor by lamplight, and that he had not known how to respond except to stand there until the feeling passed. The feeling had not passed. The minister said something about seeing your neighbor clearly, and Nathaniel thought, yes. That is exactly it. That is exactly the thing. Margaret caught him after the service. She linked her arm through his in the way she had done since he was a boy, not demanding, just present, and walked him toward the carriage with the patience of a woman who has decided to approach something sideways because direct approach has failed. Eleanor spoke to me, she said. Did she? She said you were good company on Thursday. We agreed that neither of us wanted to be there, he said. I think that qualifies as good company. Margaret pressed her lips together in a way that might have been reluctance, or might have been the very smallest possible amusement. She is not objecting to the match. I am, Nathaniel. Not today, Mother. When? He stopped walking. He turned to look at her, not with the flatness he usually brought to this conversation, but with something more direct and more tired. I need you to trust me, he said. I am not refusing because I am stubborn. I am refusing because I am trying to get something right that Father got wrong, and I need time to understand how to do it. Margaret looked at him. She had the face of a woman who has watched her son grow into someone she both recognizes and cannot fully read, and who loves him in both registers equally. What has changed? She asked quietly. He thought about the question. He thought about a woman sitting on a crate in a corridor, stitching a maid's torn hem, and saying someone should with the complete assurance of a person who had decided long ago that doing the right thing did not require an audience. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly. Margaret searched his face. Then she nodded once, not agreement, but the particular kind of acknowledgement that says, I believe you mean what you're saying, even if I can't see what you see. Don't take too long, she said, and walked ahead to the carriage. The crisis, when it came on a Wednesday. Clara had been at Whitmore Estate for exactly 26 days. It started with the old carriage house at the north end of the property, a structure that had been used as overflow storage for 15 years, and which no one entered regularly. A spark from a lantern, poorly extinguished, a corner of old cloth catching without anyone knowing. And then by mid-morning, smoke visible from the main house. The household moved fast. Thomas had procedures for exactly this kind of emergency, and they were followed with the orderly urgency of people who knew what they were doing. Buckets were organized. The stable hands were the fastest to respond. The fire did not spread beyond the carriage house itself. What happened inside the carriage house before the buckets arrived was something Nathaniel learned about afterward from 3 different people because he had been in the North Field and arrived to the tail end of it. Agnes told him first. She just went in, Agnes said, still slightly shaking. Miss Bellamy, before anyone else got there. She went in and she came out carrying the Hargrove trunk. Nathaniel turned to look at her. What Hargrove trunk? The one from the storage overflow. Thomas said it held the household documents. The estate records going back 70 years, they were all in it. Agnes paused. The fire hadn't reached it yet when she went in, but it was close. Nathaniel crossed the yard to where Thomas was directing the final stages of water management. Where is she? The kitchen, Thomas said. She's unharmed. A burn on her right hand, small. She is. Thomas paused in the particular way that meant he was editing what he had been about to say. She is arguing with Mrs. Holt about whether she needs a physician. Get a physician. I sent for one 10 minutes ago. Nathaniel crossed the yard in the direction of the kitchen without another word. Clara was sitting at the kitchen work table with her right hand resting flat in front of her and a cloth soaked in cold water pressed against it. Mrs. Holt, the cook, a large, competent woman with the organizational command of a military general and the maternal instincts of a lioness, was standing over her with an expression that combined considerable relief with considerable exasperation. There is a physician coming, Mrs. Holt said as Nathaniel entered. And she is going to sit there until he arrives, and she is not going to tell me one more time that it is fine, because I can see with my own 2 eyes that it is not. It's a small burn, Clara said, without looking up. It blistered. It blistered a little. Nathaniel crossed the room, pulled a chair out from the opposite side of the work table, and sat down. This surprised both women enough that they both went quiet. He looked at her hand under the cloth. He did not touch it. "Agnes said you went in before the water arrived," he said. Clara looked up at him. "The documents were there," she said. "The estate records. 70 years of accounts and property papers," and she stopped. "I could see the fire hadn't reached the trunk yet." "I had time, you calculated that." "Yes, from outside the building." "Yes, while it was on fire." She looked at him steadily. "I made a reasonable assessment." "You made a remarkable assumption," he said, and his voice was, and he knew it, and he didn't change it, not quite flat. There was something in it that was not anger exactly, but was adjacent to it in the way that fear, once resolved, often lands adjacent to anger. Clara looked at him with the assessing attention he had come to recognize. "The records matter," she said. "You matter," he said. The word landed in the kitchen with a weight that surprised them both. Mrs. Holt suddenly found something requiring her immediate attention at the far end of the kitchen. Clara did not look away, but something in her expression shifted the slightest change, like a door that has been closed for a long time moving an inch. "I made the choice I thought was correct," she said. "Carefully. The records are 70 years of this family's history. If they had been lost, I know what they are," Nathaniel said. "I also know that there is one of them, and there is one of you." He paused. "The records can be reconstructed if they have to be. With time and effort." He stopped. He was not, he realized, saying this correctly. He was saying it the way a man says things when he has not examined closely enough what he actually means. "Thank you," he said, more quietly, "for what you did. The records matter to this estate. But I want you to know that he chose the word carefully. Your safety matters to this house, to me." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "No one has said that to me before." In a burning building? In any building. The physician arrived 12 minutes later and confirmed what Mrs. Holt had known from the beginning. The burn was real, small but genuine, and required proper dressing and several days of lighter work. Clara accepted all of this without protest, which was itself a kind of communication that she had heard what had been said in the kitchen and received it, and was, in her way, responding to it. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen doorway while the physician worked and watched the room and thought about what she had said. "No one has said that to me before, not in a burning building. Not anywhere." He thought about a woman from a family of modest tailors who had spent 10 years learning that the way to stay safe was to be useful enough that someone needed you, because usefulness was a kind of security. Who had come to this house with one suitcase and a sewing box and an extraordinary store of knowledge, and had immediately begun applying it, not because she was told to, not because she was performing for approval, but because she believed that things and people deserved to be cared for. Who had walked into a burning building to save the records of a family that was not her own. Because they mattered. He left the kitchen before he said anything he was not ready to say. But he stood in the hall outside for a moment with his hand on the doorframe, and he knew the way you know things that rearrange the furniture of your interior life, without asking permission, that the list in his desk drawer, the one with 8 women's names written in his mother's careful handwriting, was not going to survive the week. He burned it that evening, not dramatically. He took it from the drawer, held it over the candle on his desk until it caught, then set it in the ashtray and watched it go. 8 names, 8 tidy arrangements between wealthy families. 8 ways to solve a financial problem by transforming a woman into a solution. His father had done exactly this. His father had looked at the accounts and looked at the available women of appropriate station and performed the calculation that the family required, and had made his choice with the efficiency of a man managing an estate asset. And the result had been 30 years of a beautiful house with a hollow interior, and a woman crying in a corridor, and a boy who grew up believing that love was not something that happened in marriages between people of means, because he had never seen evidence that it could. Clara had said, "This house has been managed the way beautiful things sometimes are maintained on the surface, left to deteriorate underneath. She had been talking about the estate. She had been talking about everything. He sat at his desk for a long time after the paper finished burning, and he made himself look very clearly at what he was feeling. Because he had spent 15 years becoming a man who avoided doing this, and he was beginning to understand the cost of that particular efficiency. What he was feeling was not complicated. He was falling in love with his housemaid. He was falling in love with a woman who had been here 26 days, who had a burn on her right hand from saving his family's records, who had told him that no one had ever said her safety mattered to them, who stitched other women's dresses at midnight because someone should, who walked into every room she entered and immediately saw what was broken and what could still be saved. He was falling in love with her the way you fall in love with things that are fundamentally real, not because they are perfect, but because they are true, and true things, once you have seen them clearly, become impossible to unsee. He knew sitting at that desk that nothing about this was simple. He knew that she was his employee, and he was her employer, and that the difference in their positions made anything between them begin already tilted. He knew that his mother would not understand, that the county would not understand, that Eleanor Hayes's father would certainly not understand. He knew that the estate's financial situation remained what it was, and that love, even real love, especially real love, did not resolve accounts in Richmond. He knew all of this. He also knew that he had been sitting in this house for 15 years, choosing principle over feeling, and that his principles had produced a cold and well-managed life that looked exactly like his father's from the outside and felt increasingly hollow on the inside. And he thought about Clara in that storage room, working past midnight on a forgotten gown that belonged to a dead woman, giving it the attention it deserved simply because someone should. Someone should. He was beginning to believe that was the most important idea he had ever encountered. He got up from the desk. He walked to the window. The Virginia summer dark stretched in every direction, warm, cricket loud, indifferent to the internal arrangements of wealthy estate owners. He made himself a promise, the same way he had made himself a promise over his father's grave 3 years ago. I will not do this the way it has always been done. He did not know yet what doing it differently looked like. But he was going to find out. The burn on Clara's hand healed in 8 days. Nathaniel knew this because he asked Thomas every morning how she was, and Thomas reported back every morning with the same careful neutrality of a man who has noticed something and chosen not to remark on it directly. On the 3rd day, Thomas said the physician had cleared her for light work. On the 6th day, he said she had returned to the storage rooms. On the 8th day, he said the dressing had been removed and the skin was healing cleanly. Nathaniel said good each morning and returned to his work. What he did not say was that he had walked past the east wing 3 times the previous evening, for no reason that he could have explained to anyone's satisfaction, including his own. The household had shifted again in the days following the fire. Not dramatically, nothing in a house run by Thomas Reed shifted dramatically but perceptibly, the way temperature shifts when a season turns. The staff spoke about Clara differently now, not in the way that people speak about someone who has done something impressive, and impressive things fade from conversation after a week. They spoke about her the way people speak about someone who has become part of how they understand their own lives in the present tense, with a kind of ease that suggested permanence. Agnes had started coming to Clara's workroom every afternoon after kitchen duties, ostensibly to help with linen organization, actually to sit within proximity of someone who had told her that getting smaller was a choice, not an inevitability. Even Harriet Doyle had moderated, not warmly, not with any confession that she had been wrong, but with the pragmatic adjustment of an intelligent person who has assessed a situation and decided that resistance to it is costing more than it returns. Thomas noticed all of this and said nothing except once, in the stable yard, when Nathaniel asked him directly, "What is the household's disposition toward her?" Thomas considered this for a moment with his usual gravity. They would follow her, he said, if it came to that. It was the most significant thing he had said to Nathaniel in years. And Nathaniel understood exactly what it meant and stored it somewhere internal and very still, and did not take it out again until the day everything collapsed. That day came on a Friday, 3 weeks after the fire, in the form of a letter from Richmond. The letter arrived with the morning post, which Thomas brought to Nathaniel's study at 8 o'clock, as he always did. Nathaniel was at his desk. He opened the Richmond letter last, because he had learned that letters from Richmond were best read when everything else had already been attended to, and there was nothing left to do but absorb whatever they said. The letter was from Elias Hargrove, not the agency Hargrove, a different one, the man who held the largest outstanding debt against the Whitmore estate. The tone was professional, which was the most alarming kind of tone a creditor could use. Because professional tones in financial correspondence were how men said things they did not wish to say, in a way that made it impossible to pretend you had not understood them. The substance was this: the debt, which had been extended 3 times in the previous 4 years, on the understanding that the estate's revenues would eventually cover it, had reached a threshold. Hargrove was not calling it immediately. He was instead providing a 6-month window for settlement or restructuring. He strongly suggested that restructuring take the form of a strategic marriage alliance. He did not name Eleanor Hayes. But the letter might as well have been addressed to her father, which would consolidate enough capital to satisfy the outstanding balance and provide a foundation for the estate's continued operation. He called this a natural and time-honored solution. Nathaniel read the letter twice. Then he set it on the desk and looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something you already knew was coming, but had hoped would arrive differently. He called for Thomas. Thomas read the letter without sitting down. His face did not change, which meant he was more alarmed than usual. "How long have you known this was coming?" Nathaniel asked. "I did not know the specific threshold," Thomas said. "But I knew the trajectory." He set the letter back on the desk. "Your father managed the debt with optimism. He believed the estate revenues would recover. They did not, and the Hayes marriage would cover it." "The Hayes capital would cover it, yes." Thomas paused. Comfortably, Nathaniel stood up. He walked to the window not to look at anything, but because standing behind the desk in this conversation felt wrong. "And if I don't take that route?" Thomas was quiet for exactly the right number of seconds. "There are other options," he said. "They are less comfortable." "Tell me," Thomas told him. They were selling the east quarter of the land, which would reduce the estate's revenue-generating capacity by roughly a third, creating a longer-term problem in solving a shorter-term one. Taking on additional debt against the remaining property, which was a version of the same trap. Or a private investor arrangement, which Thomas had actually researched. He produced a second document from somewhere about his person with the air of a man who prepares for contingencies involving a partnership with a consortium in Philadelphia that was investing in Virginia agricultural operations. Nathaniel read the Philadelphia document. It was not ideal. It involved ceding some operational control and accepting a lower return for 5 years while the investment was recouped. But it was real, and it was possible, and it did not require selling a woman into a marriage to save the furniture. "This would work?" he asked. "It would require your personal involvement in the negotiations," Thomas said. "And it would require your mother's cooperation, because the arrangement involves some reclassification of the estate assets that she has partial claim on." Nathaniel set the document down. "My mother will not cooperate," he said flatly. "Not when she has the Hayes option on the table." "No," Thomas agreed. "She will not." The room was quiet. "Don't tell her about Richmond yet," Nathaniel said. "I need a week." Thomas nodded. "One other thing," he said as he moved toward the door. "What?" Miss Bellamy asked this morning if she might reorganize the upper storage corridor. She has a plan for increasing the usable space and reducing the humidity problem that has been affecting the garments stored there. He paused. "I told her I would ask you." Nathaniel looked at him. "Tell her yes." Thomas left. Nathaniel sat back down at his desk and looked at the Richmond letter, and thought about his father, who had solved this problem the only way he believed it could be solved. And about his grandmother's wedding gown folded in acid-free paper in the east storage room, and about what it truly cost, in ways that did not appear in any account book, to solve problems by using people as currency. He picked up a pen. He began writing to Philadelphia. His mother found out about the Richmond letter on the third day. He did not know how. He suspected Thomas had not told her. Thomas was too careful for that, but households had their own intelligence networks, and Margaret Whitmore had spent 30 years learning to read the temperature of hers. She came to his study in the early afternoon, before he expected her, and sat down across from his desk without being invited, which was how he knew she already knew. "Hargrove wrote," she said. He set down his pen. "Yeah." "And you are not going to tell me." "I was going to tell you when I had a plan." "You already have a plan," she said. "Eleanor Hayes is the plan." "She has always been the plan." She looked at him with the directness that she brought out on occasions when the situation had passed the point where indirection was useful. "Nathaniel, I know you believe you are different from your father. I know you believe you will find another way. But the estate is real, the debt is real, and the time has come to make a real decision." "I am making one," he said. "A different one." He told her about Philadelphia. She listened. Her face remained composed in the way that very controlled people keep their faces composed when they were absorbing something they strongly wish had not been said. When he finished, she said, "That seeds control, yes. For 5 years, yes. And at the end of 5 years, we are a managed agricultural investment, not an independent estate. At the end of 5 years, we are a solvent independent estate with a functioning revenue model," he said. "The alternative is selling the East Quarter, and then in 10 years we have the same problem with less land." Margaret was quiet. "Why?" she asked, and the question was smaller than the others, and meant something different. Nathaniel looked at his mother. At the woman who spent 30 years in a beautiful house being managed by a man who believed that efficiency was the same as love. At the woman who had cried in this hallway when he was 12 years old and called it nothing, because she had learned to call it nothing. "Because I refuse," he said quietly, "to look at Eleanor Hayes the way Father looked at you." Like a solution, Margaret did not speak for a very long time. When she did, her voice was different, lower. The voice she used when she was not performing for an audience, even an audience of one. "She is not unwilling," she said. "Eleanor, I spoke with her. She understands what the arrangement would be, and she is not." "Mother," he cut her off gently but completely. "Eleanor Hayes deserves a man who chooses her. Not a man who chooses her estate. I will not be the second generation of Whitmore men who cannot tell the difference." His mother looked at him, and something in her face, not surrender, not agreement, but something older and more private, shifted. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She was composed again, every inch of herself gathered back into the shape that 30 years of practice had made automatic. "The Philadelphia arrangement," she said. "Show me the document." He showed her. She took it from his desk and walked out of the room without another word. 2 days later, the next wave hit. It came in the form of an early morning commotion in the servants' hall that Thomas brought to Nathaniel's attention before breakfast. One of the stable hands, a young man named Foster, 19 years old, recently hired, had accused Clara of going through his personal belongings. The accusation was specific. Foster claimed he had seen her in the servants' hall on the previous evening, near the row of pegs where the staff kept their personal items during working hours, in the vicinity of his coat. Nathaniel arrived at the servants' hall to find the situation in its acute phase. Foster stood at one end of the room, red-faced and certain of himself in the aggressive way of young men who have decided they are right before they have finished assembling the evidence. Clara stood at the other end, composed in the way that Nathaniel had learned to read as a kind of armor, not cold, not closed, but gathered together against something. Agnes was near the window, and her expression was one of profound anxiety. Thomas stood in the center with his hands clasped and his face its usual unreadable self, but Nathaniel could read Thomas well enough by now to know that the stillness was deliberate. "Tell me what happened," Nathaniel said to the room. Foster told his version. He had come for his coat. He had seen Miss Bellamy standing near the pegs. His coin purse was missing. Thomas said, before Clara could speak. "I should mention that I can account for Miss Bellamy's movements yesterday evening. She came to me at 7:30 to report that a candle in the servants' hall had been left burning in an unsafe location. I went with her and we addressed it. She was in my company until 8 o'clock. The room went quiet. Foster blinked. "The coat pegs are visible from the candle location," Thomas continued, with the serenity of a man holding 4 aces. "If Miss Bellamy was standing near them, it was because we were both dealing with the candle." A longer silence. Foster's certainty began to lose its structural integrity. Clara had not moved. She had not looked away from Nathaniel. She was watching him the way she watched things, when she wanted to understand them, not defensively, not performatively. "Just directly, Foster," Nathaniel said. He kept his voice level. "Where did you last see your coin purse before yesterday evening?" Foster thought about this. His jaw worked. "In my coat pocket," he said. "I had it," he stopped. "At lunch," he finished less certainly. "And where were you at lunch?" "The stable yard." "Who else was in the stable yard at lunch?" Foster's face was doing something complicated. "The other stable hands," he said. Stopped again. Nathaniel waited. "And the new contract man," Foster said very quietly. "Dawes, he was asking about the horses." There was a beat of profound silence. "I see," Nathaniel said. He looked at the room. "Thomas, I'd like you to speak with Mr. Dawes today." And Foster, he turned to the young man and let the pause be what it needed to be. "When you are ready to apologize to Miss Bellamy, you will find that she receives apologies the same way she receives everything else." Honestly, he left. Clara caught up with him in the corridor, which surprised him. She did not usually follow him, and she did not usually speak to him first. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. He stopped and turned. She stood in the corridor with her hands at her sides, and that steady quality fully in place. But there was something underneath it, something slightly less composed than usual, a quality of effort to the composure that he had not seen before. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't do anything. Thomas did." "You came," she said, "before you knew what had happened or who was wrong." A pause. "You came," he looked at her. "I will always come," he said. He meant it practically. He heard it, after it was out, as something considerably larger. He could see from the slight change in her expression that she heard it the same way. "Neither of them addressed that directly," she said. "The upper storage corridor is finished. If you have time this week, I'd like to show you the arrangement." "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. She walked back the way she had come. He stood in the corridor for a moment and did something he rarely did, which was nothing. Just stood there and recognized what was happening to him, and let it be what it was. The upper storage corridor was, by any reasonable standard, a remarkable transformation. Nathaniel walked through it the next morning, while Claire explained what she had done and why. And he found himself in the specific state of attention that occurs when someone shows you something they understand deeply, and their understanding makes you understand it too. She had reorganized the space entirely, not just cleaned and ordered, but reconsidered the logic of the entire system. Building a new structure from the inside out that used the available space more intelligently and addressed the humidity issue by changing the circulation through the corridor. She showed him the airflow change. She showed him the new labeling system. She showed him 3 items she had identified that were still in salvageable condition that would have been unsalvageable within one more season. He listened to all of it, and then, because he was Nathaniel Whitmore and he had spent his entire adult life being a man who did things deliberately, he said, "Why does this matter to you?" She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. "I mean specifically," he said. "Not the work. The work I understand, you were trained, you have knowledge, the work is logical." But he chose his next words with care. "You came here with 1 suitcase. You had a position at the Calloway household in Fredericksburg that Mrs. Calloway was sorry to lose you from. You could have gone somewhere larger, somewhere with more resources. Why did you come here?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I heard the estate was in difficulty." He blinked. "You came to a struggling estate deliberately." I came because struggling estates need people who know how to preserve things. She folded her hands. Estates that are doing well can afford to let things deteriorate and replace them. Estates that are in difficulty cannot. Everything matters more when there is less of everything. She paused. I am most useful where I am most needed. Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. That, he said slowly, is either the most selfless thing I have ever heard or the most practical. I've never found those to be opposites, she said. He almost smiled, and he noticed it because he was watching for it. She almost smiled back. Clara, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed. He saw her notice. She did not correct him or step back or adjust the distance between them in any of the ways that would have been available to her. I need to tell you something, he said, about the estate. She waited. He told her about the Richmond letter. About Hargrove and the debt and the 6-month window. He told her about Philadelphia and the consortium and his mother reading the document and not yet giving him an answer. He told her because she had come to this estate knowing it was struggling and had given it everything she had, and she deserved to know what shape the struggle currently took. She listened to all of it without interrupting. Her face was still, but her eyes were active. He had learned to read the difference processing and weighing with the same thoroughness she brought to a damaged garment. When he finished, she said, "What does your mother say about Philadelphia?" She hasn't said yet. She'll say no. He looked at her. Why do you think that? Because Philadelphia is a real solution and it doesn't require you to marry Eleanor Hayes, Clara said. And your mother still believes the Hayes marriage is the right answer. Not because she wants to control you, because she is afraid. A pause. She watched this estate and this family deteriorate for 30 years, and she believes the only reliable solution is the one that has always worked. Money marrying money. Nathaniel absorbed this. You've talked to her? She talked to me, Clara said, 2 days ago in the East Corridor. She stopped me and asked me how the storage work was progressing. A brief pause. She was not asking about storage. Nathaniel stared at her. What was she asking? She was looking at me, Clara said simply. She was figuring out what I was. The sentence sat between them like a lit candle in a dark room. And what are you? He asked. His voice was very quiet. Clara looked at him. The composure was fully in place, but he could see now, with the clarity of someone who has been paying close attention for weeks, that it was costing her something. That underneath the steadiness there was a woman who had learned to be careful with herself, because carefulness had kept her safe. And who was standing in a corridor in a struggling estate talking to her employer about things that were not strictly speaking employer and housemaid territory, and who knew it. I am a housemaid, she said, who is very good at her job. It was not an evasion, it was also not a complete answer. Nathaniel knew this. She knew he knew it. I'm going to Philadelphia next week, he said. To speak with the consortium in person. I'll be gone 4 days. He paused. When I come back, I want to have a real conversation. About the estate, about what comes next. Another pause shorter. About things that aren't just the estate. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression that he could not fully name, not quite fear, not quite hope. Something that lived in the borderland between them. Yes, sir, she said. Nathaniel, he said. She blinked. When we're not in front of the rest of the household, he said. My name is Nathaniel. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Yes, she said. Not yes, sir. Just yes. He left for Philadelphia the following Monday. He was gone for 5 days, not 4, because the consortium negotiations were more complex than the documents had suggested, and he needed an additional meeting. He sent a letter on the 3rd day to Thomas, which Thomas read aloud to the household as was customary for staff communication from the estate owner, and which stated that the negotiations were proceeding and that the estate should continue its normal operation. It did not say anything to Clara. She understood this. She also understood, in the way of someone who had been paying careful attention for longer than she had quite admitted to herself, that there had been a message in the conversation in the upper storage corridor that had nothing to do with accounts in Richmond or a consortium in Philadelphia. And that she had been standing in that corridor with the full weight of what he had been saying landing on her, and she had said yes, sir, because it was true and safe and contained. And then he had offered his name without the title, and she had taken it because she was not, at her core, the kind of woman who refused the true thing when it was offered. She did not know what to do with any of this. She went back to work, which was always what she did when she did not know what to do. She finished the upper corridor. She began on the north storage attic, which Thomas had mentioned would need attention. She repaired 2 more household garments that did not fall under her formal responsibilities, and which she repaired anyway, because someone should. Agnes, on the 3rd evening, said to her, "Do you miss him?" Clara looked up from her work. "Mr. Whitmore," Agnes clarified, and her voice was carefully without inflection, in the way that young women are carefully without inflection when they are in the middle of saying exactly what they mean. "He's been gone 3 days, Clara said. "That's not what I asked." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "He listens," she said finally. He's not what I expected when I came here. I expected the estate, the accounts, the kind of man who sees everything in columns." She looked at her hands. "He sees columns, but he also sees the thing underneath the columns. What costs what it means when something is lost, and what it would take to preserve it." She paused. "I didn't expect that." Agnes was very still. She was 17 years old, and she was smart enough to understand that she was witnessing something that she would remember for a long time. "Clara," she said softly, "he's not just talking about the estate when he talks to you." Clara looked at her, then she looked away. "I know," she said. That was the first time she admitted it. Not to Nathaniel, not to herself in full light, but to a 17-year-old girl in a workroom in the East Wing quietly, in the way that the most important things are first spoken sideways, softly. Because saying them outright would make them real enough to be dangerous. Nathaniel came back on a Thursday evening, later than expected, and came directly from the road to the study without stopping. Thomas was there within minutes with a summary of what had happened in the household during his absence, and Nathaniel listened to all of it, and asked the question Thomas had been expecting. Miss Bellamy completed the upper corridor, began on the north attic. Submitted 2 structural observations about the north attic ceiling that will require your attention. Thomas paused with the precision of a man releasing information in calculated order. "She as well." "Good," Nathaniel said. He went upstairs. He did not sleep particularly well. In the morning he found her in the north attic, which was accessible by a narrow stair at the end of the upper hall. She was working by window light, sorting through a collection of items that had not been touched in what appeared to be decades. She heard him on the stair and turned. "You're back," she said. "Yesterday evening." Thomas said the consortium was promising. They agreed to terms. He stepped into the attic. "It will take my mother's signature on the asset reclassification. I haven't told her yet. She'll resist. She will." He looked around the attic. "You started up here already. The ceiling has a moisture problem in the northeast corner," she said, moving toward it. "There is existing damage to a section of the structural beam. It hasn't failed, but it will within 2 or 3 years without intervention." She showed him the section. She had marked it with a small strip of cloth so it was visible at a glance. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "Clara," he said. She turned, and everything he had been preparing to say, the measured version, the careful version, the version that was appropriate to the situation and the relationship and the considerable difference in their positions, dissolved when he looked at her and found her looking at him with that direct, undefended quality that was the most honest thing he had ever seen in another person's face. "I thought about you," he said, "in Philadelphia, in the consortium meetings and between the consortium meetings and on the road back." He paused. "That has not happened to me before, in relation to anyone." Clara was very still. "I am aware," he said, "that I am your employer. I am aware that saying this to you puts you in a position where you may feel that there is no safe response. I want you to know that there isn't one right answer, and there isn't a wrong answer, and the estate will not change regardless of what you say to me right now." She looked at him for a long time. "You planned that speech," she said. "I've been on the road for 2 days. Something moved through her expression, something warmer than her usual composure, and slightly undone around the edges. "You thought about me," she said. Not a question, naming it. "Yes, what did you think?" He looked at her steadily. "That I have never met anyone who does the right thing more consistently and more quietly. That I have never met anyone who made me look at my own life and understand what it was actually missing." He paused. "That I would like very much for you to stay, not as a housemaid. As something I don't have the right word for yet, because I have been a man who lives by the right words, and I have run out of them." The attic was very quiet. Clara looked at him for a long moment that had several things in it at once: recognition, and something that was almost grief, and underneath both of those, something that was bright and carefully held down. "I came here," she said slowly, "because struggling estates need people who know how to preserve things." She looked at him. "I did not come here to fall in love with you." The sentence hit him in the chest like a physical object. "But," he said. But she said very quietly. He took one step toward her. And then the door at the bottom of the attic stair opened, and Margaret Whitmore's voice came up the narrow stairs with perfect, devastating timing. "Nathaniel? Thomas said you were up here. I need to speak with you about the Philadelphia document. I've read it 3 more times and I have questions." He looked at Clara. She looked at him. For one perfect, impossible second, they were just 2 people in an attic who had said true things to each other and were standing in the exact moment before everything changed. Then Clara looked away. She bent back to her work. "Go," she said quietly. "She needs you, Clara." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. And then so low he almost missed it. "Nathaniel." His name, without the title. He went to the stairs. His mother was already talking before he reached her, already moving back through the upper hall toward the study with the document in her hand, and her questions organized in the brisk, precise way she organized everything. He followed and listened and answered what she asked. But he heard it the whole walk down, quiet and clear as a bell. Nathaniel. 3 days later, Margaret Whitmore signed the Philadelphia document. She did not do it gracefully. She did it at the desk in the study with Nathaniel beside her, and she held the pen for a long moment before she used it, and when she finally signed, she set the pen down and said, "This is not how I imagined saving this house." "I know," he said. "Your grandfather would not have understood it." "My grandfather's methods have left us with a debt in Richmond," Nathaniel said, with a gentleness that took the edge off the truth without removing the truth itself. "I think we can afford to try something different." Margaret looked at the signed document, and Eleanor Hayes. "Eleanor Hayes will find someone who chooses her," he said. "She deserves that." His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, without looking at him, "The housemaid." The air in the room changed, Mother. "I am not objecting," she said. Still not looking at him. "I am observing. There is a difference." She folded her hands on the desk. "She is not what I would have chosen, I know. She is, I don't know what she is precisely. I spoke with her twice, and both times I came away feeling that she had understood everything I said and a significant amount of what I had not said." A pause. "Which is uncomfortable." Despite everything, Nathaniel felt something that was almost humor. "Yes," he said, "I know." Margaret finally looked at him. The expression on her face was the one she reserved for moments when she was saying something she meant fully and wanted received fully. "Don't do what your father did," she said. "Don't make a practical decision and call it love." "I'm not," he said, "I promise you." "Then what is it?" He thought about the attic. About I did not come here to fall in love with you. About his own name said without a title quietly as he went down the stairs. "It's the real thing," he said, "I think. I've never had it before, so I can't be entirely certain. But it feels like the real thing." Margaret looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once, short, the way she nodded when she had accepted something she was not yet fully comfortable with, and picked up the signed document and held it out to him. He took it. "Nathaniel," she said. He stopped. "Don't wait too long," she said. "The real thing doesn't wait indefinitely." He went to find Clara. She was in the east storage room, where she had started, where it had all started, standing at the work table with the register open in front of her. making an inventory notation with the steady precision that he had watched for almost 2 months now and still found extraordinary. She heard him come in, she turned, she saw his face. And she set the pen down. He crossed the room, he stopped 2 feet from her, because he was Nathaniel Whitmore, and he was going to do this correctly or die trying. "I have a question to ask you," he said. "All right," she said. He reached into his coat pocket. He produced a ring, his grandmother's, the one that had been in the estate safe for 30 years, the one from the woman whose wedding gown Clara had saved from a cedar chest in the middle of the night without being asked. He had taken it from the safe that morning and had been carrying it since. He held it out. "Clara Bellamy," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, she looked at him, and she said no. The word landed in the storage room like a stone dropped into still water. No. Nathaniel stood there with the ring in his outstretched hand and the silence coming in around the edges of the word, and he did not move. Not because he was stunned, exactly, but because something in him had understood, the moment it left her mouth, that this was not a door closing. It was a door he had not known was there, and it had just swung open to reveal a room he had not prepared for. Clara did not step back, she did not look away. She held his gaze with that unflinching directness that he had first noticed in the East storage room 2 months ago and had not been able to unsee since, and she said, into the silence, "You haven't asked me what I want." He lowered his hand slowly. "What do you mean?" "You came in here," she said, "with your grandmother's ring and a question. But before the question, before the ring, I need to understand something." She folded her hands in front of her, the way she did when she was about to say something she had prepared carefully. "Why me, Nathaniel?" He opened his mouth. "Not the answer you've been rehearsing," she said. "The real one." He closed his mouth. He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that another woman might have grown uncomfortable. Clara did not grow uncomfortable. She waited the way, she waited for everything completely, without performance. "Because you are the first person," he said slowly, "who walked into this house and saw what it actually was. Not the estate, not the name, not the account balance." He paused. "You saw what had been neglected. You saw what could still be saved. And then you stayed and you did the work without being asked and without asking for anything back." He paused again. "Because you are the most honest person I have ever known, and I have been surrounded by careful people my entire life. And I did not know until you arrived how much I was starving for honesty." Clara listened to all of this, then she said, "And what do I want?" The question stopped him cold. He paused. "I assumed that what I want and what you want might be." "That's exactly it," she said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was exact. "You assumed. You came to Philadelphia, and you negotiated terms and you secured your mother's signature, and you came down here with a ring, and at no point did you ask me what I want from my own life." She looked at him steadily. "I told you in the attic that I did not come here to fall in love with you. I told you but. You heard the but and you assumed the rest." "Clara, I grew up watching my mother take in other people's garments," she said. "She was brilliant at it, the best I have ever seen. She worked from before sunrise until after dark, and she was paid in amounts that did not reflect what she was worth. And she thanked every client who came through the door because thanking them kept them coming back." She looked at her hands for a moment. "She never once chose what she made. She made what she was given. She repaired what she was handed, and she was grateful, always, because being grateful was how she kept the work." She looked up. "I decided when I was 15 years old that I would be useful, but I would not be grateful for things that were not gifts. I would not mistake someone else's benefit for my own happiness." Nathaniel was very still. "You are offering me security," she said. "A title, a house, a position in this county that would transform how every person I have ever met looks at me. These are real things." She paused. "They are your things. They are things you have, and you are placing them in front of me, and you are calling that a question." She looked at him. "But you have not asked what I would have if I had nothing to do with you. What I want, that is mine alone, what I am building toward." Her voice did not waver. "You have not asked, Nathaniel. Not once." The ring was still in his hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it back in his pocket. "What do you want?" he said quietly, without the proposal attached to it. She studied him, making sure the question was real, making sure it was not a strategy. "I want a workroom," she said. "My own, not borrowed space in someone else's house. A room where I can teach what I know to women who need a skill they can use, who need income that belongs to them, who need to understand that the work of their hands has value that does not require someone else's permission to claim." She held his gaze. "I want to be known for what I can do, not for who I married." The room was very quiet. "That is what you want," he said. "That is part of what I want," she said. "Yes," he nodded slowly. He was doing what he always did when he received information that rearranged things, absorbing it completely, without deflection. "I made the same mistake my father made," he said. "Yes, I looked at you and I saw what I needed," he said. "And I called it love, and I did not ask what you needed." "Yes," she said for the third time, but her voice was softer now. Not softer because she was retreating, softer because he had understood, and she had not been entirely certain he would. He looked at her for a long, long moment. "I'm going to go," he said. "And I'm going to think about what you just told me. And when I come back," he stopped. "If I come back with something that is actually a question and not an arrangement, will you listen?" She looked at him, and in her face, underneath all that careful composure, he could see it, the thing she had said in the attic, the thing she had not quite said in full and had been carrying since. "Yes," she said. He left. He did not slam the door. He did not do anything dramatic. He walked out of the east storage room and down the corridor and into the late summer afternoon and stood in the stable yard and stared at the middle distance for a long time. Because he was a man who had just been told the truest thing anyone had ever said to him, and he needed to let it settle completely before he made another move. Thomas found him there 20 minutes later, which meant Thomas had either witnessed the departure from the storage room or had the kind of institutional knowledge of the house that made finding people instinctive. Either was possible with Thomas. "She turned you down," Thomas said. Not a question. Nathaniel looked at him. "You knew she would." Thomas was quiet for a beat. "I suspected she might." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would not have heard it from me," Thomas said, with the serenity of a man who has watched generations of Whitmore men make the same category of mistake. "Some things have to arrive on their own." Nathaniel put his hands in his coat pockets. His left hand found the ring again. "She wants a workroom," he said. "Her own, to teach textile skills to women who need independent income." Thomas said nothing. "I gave her a job," Nathaniel said. "I asked her a question with a ring in my hand. I did not once ask her what she was building toward." He paused. "I was so busy not being my father that I repeated his exact error by different means." "The form changes," Thomas said. "The habit beneath it persists until it doesn't." Nathaniel looked at the older man. "How do I fix this?" Thomas considered the question with his usual care. "You cannot fix it," he said. "Fixing implies it was a mechanism that broke." "It wasn't. It was an understanding you lacked." He paused. "What you can do is act differently, consistently. Over time, without asking for credit. That's a long road." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "It is." The next morning Nathaniel appeared in the east storage room before Clara arrived. He sat down at the work table, not behind it, the way he sat at his own desk, but at the side of it, in the position of someone who has come to work, not to preside, and he had a notebook open and a pen. And when Clara walked in and stopped at the door, he looked up and said, "I want to understand the workroom." She looked at him for a moment. "What you described yesterday," he said. "Teach me what it would need. Space, resources, what you would teach, who the women would be, how they would find you, how the income would work." He looked at the notebook. "I want to understand it the way I understand the estate accounts. Not to judge it, to understand it." Clara stood in the doorway. Then she walked to the table and sat down across from him. "All right," she said. What followed was 2 hours that felt like nothing. She talked about it the way she talked about everything she cared about, precisely, specifically, without ornamentation, but with a quality of internal heat beneath the precision that surfaced when she got into the parts she cared about most. The teaching, The particular skills that were disappearing because no one was passing them on. The women who had no income of their own and no means to build one. The difference between charity and a skill, the way a skill could not be taken back, could not be revoked if circumstances changed, belonged to the person who held it in perpetuity. Nathaniel wrote it all down, not to record it for later reference. Because the act of writing made him listen more completely, and he wanted to listen more completely than he had ever listened to anything. When she finished, he looked at what he had written, then looked at her. "The North Cottage," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "On the north end of the property, the tenant cottage. The family who occupied it moved to Richmond in the spring, and I haven't assigned it since." He turned the notebook toward her. "It has a main room that could serve as a workroom. Storage on the side. It would need some refitting, but nothing significant." He paused. "It's yours if you want it." Clara looked at him. She looked at the notebook. She looked at him again. "You're giving me a cottage," she said. "I'm offering you a space for the workroom you described," he said. "The cottage belongs to the estate. The use of it would be yours. If you leave Whitmore Estate for any reason, I'll transfer the lease to your name at no cost." He met her eyes. "It is not a condition. It does not require anything from you." The room was very quiet. "Why?" she said. "Because someone should," he said. Her own words. Back to her, she looked at the table for a moment. Something moved through her face, not the contained composure she wore by habit, but something real and slightly unguarded. The way faces look when something unexpected has arrived and the practiced response hasn't had time to assemble itself. "The women who would come," she said after a moment. "Some of them would be servants, from this county. Some might be from estates nearby, I know. Some of the families might object." "They might," he said. "I don't particularly concern myself with the opinions of men who have decided that women knowing how to earn an income is a threat to their comfort." Something flickered in her expression, almost not quite but almost amusement. "You've thought about this," she said. "I've been awake since 4 o'clock this morning," he said. "I have thought about very little else." She was quiet. "Then I'll look at the cottage. I'll have Thomas give you the key." She went to the cottage that afternoon with Agnes, who came along in the capacity of enthusiastic assistant and occasional structural commentator. Agnes had not been told the full context of the cottage offer, but Agnes, at 17, was smart enough to understand that something significant was occurring and to support it without requiring a full explanation. The cottage needed work. Clara walked through it the way she walked through everything, seeing what was there and what wasn't, calculating what could be changed and at what cost. The main room was the right size, the light was good. The storage space was genuine. The floor needed attention in the northeast corner, which she noted with a kind of satisfaction that felt like irony, given that noticing floor problems was how this whole thing had started. She stood in the center of the main room for a long time. Agnes stood in the doorway and watched her. "You're going to say yes," Agnes said finally. Clara looked at her. "To the cottage, to all of it," Agnes said. Eventually, Clara was quiet for a moment. "He made a mistake," she said. "He knew it before you finished explaining it," Agnes said. "I've seen a lot of people make mistakes, Clara. Most of them don't understand what they did wrong for years, if ever." She leaned against the doorframe. "He understood before he left the room. Understanding isn't the same as changing." "No," Agnes agreed, "but it's where changing starts." Clara looked at the room, at the good light, at the right size. At the northeast floor, that needed the same attention she had identified in the main house on her first week and reported to Thomas and had actually been repaired. "My mother never had a room like this," she said. "Her workroom was a corner of the kitchen. Everything she made in someone else's space." She paused. "She was wonderful at what she did. She never had a room that was hers." Agnes didn't speak. She understood, with the instinct of someone who paid attention, that this wasn't a statement that needed a response. It was just the truth being said out loud to make it real. Clara ran one hand along the windowsill. "Tell Thomas the floor needs attention in the northeast corner," she said. "Same treatment as the east servants' wing. I'll write up the details tonight." Agnes's face broke into a smile so wide it almost eclipsed her entirely. "Yes," she said, "Miss Bellamy." The news about the cottage moved through the household, the way news always moved through households, faster than anyone who hadn't been paying attention would have thought possible, and carrying more weight by the time it arrived than it had when it departed. Harriet Doyle heard about it at supper and was quiet for an unusually long time after. Then she said, to no one in particular, "She's building something." No one disagreed. Margaret Whitmore heard about it from Thomas the next morning, in the form of an accounting request for the cottage refitting. She read the request with her characteristic thorough attention, and then she said, "This is the workroom that she described." "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said. "He offered it without conditions." "As far as I understand it, yes, ma'am." Margaret set the request down. She looked at it for a moment, with the expression she wore when she was recalibrating something internal. "Approve it," she said. "Full budget for the refitting." Thomas picked up the document. "Yes, ma'am, Thomas," she said as he turned to go. "Ma'am," she was quiet for a moment, "is she good for him?" Thomas considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "She is good for this house," he said. "She sees it clearly. She is honest with him in a way that I oppose. In a way that I have not always been able to be, because my position requires a certain deference that hers does not." He paused again. "And I think she is very good for him specifically. Whether she chooses to be remains her decision." Margaret nodded once. "Yes," she said, "it does. Nathaniel did not go to the cottage while Clara was evaluating it. He knew this the way he knew many things now by asking himself what he would have done 2 months ago and doing the opposite. 2 months ago he would have gone, would have stood in the doorway and watched her assess the space, and read the results from her face, and felt pleased with himself for providing what she needed. Now he stayed in the study and worked on the Philadelphia correspondence and let her have the cottage without his presence in it. It was harder than he expected, not dramatically hard, but genuinely hard in the specific way that restraint is hard when you care deeply about the outcome. Thomas brought him her written report on the cottage floor at 5 o'clock. It was exactly what he would have expected: clear, specific, detailed, with a cost estimate that was accurate to within a few dollars, because she was Clara Bellamy and imprecision was not in her vocabulary. He read it. He approved the repair. He added one line at the bottom of the approval: "Whatever else she identifies will also be approved. No further consultation required. Her assessment is sufficient." He gave it back to Thomas. Thomas read the addition. Something moved on his face. "I'll make sure she sees this notation," he said. "You don't need to make a point of it," Nathaniel said. "No, sir," Thomas agreed, "but I will make sure she sees it." 3 days after the cottage offer, a letter arrived from Eleanor Hayes. Not from her father, not from her mother, from Eleanor herself in handwriting that was as direct as she was, addressed to Nathaniel personally. He opened it at his desk. She wrote without preamble. She had heard through the efficient channels of Virginia County Society that the Whitmore estate had arranged alternative financing through Philadelphia and would not be pursuing the marriage alliance. She wanted him to know that she was not grieved by this. She wanted him to know that she had suspected from the beginning that she was not what he was looking for, and had been relieved, honestly, by the alternative. She said, and this was the part he read twice, that she had spoken with his mother on 2 occasions, and that Margaret Whitmore was, in her opinion, a remarkable woman who deserved better than a daughter-in-law chosen by financial necessity, and that she hoped he would find someone who chose him and was chosen freely in return. She closed with, "I hope the woman you are clearly thinking about, when you look at anything else, has the good sense to say yes eventually. She looked clever enough the one time I glimpsed her." Nathaniel set the letter down. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he wrote Eleanor Hayes the most genuine thank you letter he had written in years, which was not very long but was entirely true, and sent it with the afternoon post. The first woman came to the cottage on a Tuesday. She was not someone Clara had recruited. She was a woman named Martha Greer, 34, recently widowed, living with her husband's family in conditions that Thomas described when he told Nathaniel about it, as difficult to improve. She had heard about the cottage through Agnes, who had heard about it through the servant networks of the county, which were considerable. She came to the cottage at 10 in the morning, while Clara was still in the process of setting it up. She knocked on the door. Clara opened it. The woman said, "I heard you're going to teach." Clara looked at her for a moment. "I'm not ready yet," she said. "The space isn't set up." The woman looked at the room behind Clara. "Can I help?" Clara looked at her. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in then," she said. Nathaniel heard about this from Agnes at supper, relayed through Thomas, which was how most things reached him now, through a chain of household communication that had become significantly more efficient since Clara arrived. There was a woman there, Thomas said, helping her organize. They were there until dark. Nathaniel absorbed this. A student? Possibly. I understand she was also something of a help with the furniture arrangement. He found himself smiling. He did not try to hide it from Thomas, because Thomas had already seen everything relevant, and concealment was a waste of effort at this point. Good, he said. The second twist came from an entirely unexpected direction. It was not financial. It was not from Philadelphia or Richmond or Eleanor Hayes. It came from a man named Silas Bellamy, who arrived at Whitmore Estate on a Thursday morning with a rented horse and a coat that had once been good and now showed the particular wear of circumstances that had declined, and who presented himself at the servants' entrance and asked for Clara. Thomas received this information before Clara did and brought it to Nathaniel. Because in 40 years of running a household, Thomas had developed a precise instinct for which arrivals required estate owner's awareness before they proceeded further. Her father, Nathaniel said, I believe so, sir. He gave the name Bellamy, and he asked for Clara, specifically. He did not ask for Miss Bellamy. Nathaniel looked at Thomas for a moment. Where is she? The cottage. She's been there since 8. Has he been told where she is? Not yet. Then keep it that way until I've spoken with her. He went to the cottage. He knocked on the door frame because the door was open, and Clara looked up from where she was seated at the work table organizing supplies. She read his face. What's happened? There is a man at the servants' entrance, he said carefully. He gave the name Bellamy. He asked for you by your given name. Something happened to Clara's face. It moved through several expressions too fast to track individually, and then it settled, but settled in a different place than it had started, somewhere more guarded and less clear. How old, she said. Thomas described him as mid-50s. With a coat that's seen better years. She closed the supply ledger in front of her. My father, she said. He waited. I haven't spoken to him in 4 years, she said. Her voice was level, but it was level in the way that required effort. He and my mother when she died, 3 years before I left Fredericksburg. She stopped. He made choices after she died that I could not support. I left. I have not written to him since. Nathaniel was very still. He came here, she agreed. Something moved through her expression, not grief, exactly, but the older brother of grief. Which means he knows where I am, which means he wants something. You don't have to see him, Nathaniel said. She looked up at him. I know, she said, and the way she said it, the completeness of it, told him that this was something she had not always known and had learned at some cost. I'll see him, she said, but she paused. I'd like you to be in the room. He looked at her. If that's what you want, it's what I want. Silas Bellamy was a man who had been handsome once and still carried the shape of it, the way old furniture carries the shape of the quality it was made from, even when the surface has worn. He was 56, with hands that had done careful work for many years, and eyes that moved quickly around a room in the way of someone assessing exits and advantages simultaneously. He sat in the small receiving room off the main hall, not the formal parlor, which Nathaniel had decided deliberately, and he rose when Clara came in, which was a gesture in the right direction that did not fully compensate for the 4 years of silence. Clara sat down without being invited. Nathaniel sat slightly behind her, at an angle in the position that says I am here, but this is not my conversation. Silas looked at him. I wanted to speak to my daughter privately. And I wanted him here, Clara said. Her voice was completely even. Tell me why you've come. Her father's jaw moved. He made the adjustment of a man who had prepared for one conversation and is recalibrating for another. "I heard you were doing well," he said. "You heard I was working at Whitmore Estate." "Word gets around, it does," she folded her hands. "Why are you here, Father?" He looked at his hands. Then at her, then briefly, at Nathaniel, in the way of a man who wants an audience, gone and knows he cannot make that happen. "Your brother's situation has become difficult," he said. "Eli, he had a business arrangement that did not hold." "He needs some capital to know," Clara said. The word was exactly as final as it sounded. Silas blinked. "You haven't heard the amount. It doesn't matter." "Clara, you left," she said, not loudly, not with the particular pitch of old wounds that have never been treated. Just factually, the way she said everything, after Mother died. "You left the house and the debts and Eli's problems and my brother's arrangement, and you came back 6 months later with a woman I had never met and a plan that involved money that was not yours to spend." She looked at him. "I left, I built something of my own. I am not a resource to be located and drawn upon when circumstances require it." Silas looked at his daughter. He looked like a man who has arrived at a destination expecting one thing, and found something entirely different, not a younger, softer version of the woman he remembered, but the full-grown thing she had become, complete and unapologetic. "Your mother would have—" "My mother worked herself half to death in other people's spaces, making other people's clothes," Clara said, and her voice finally changed, not breaking, but shifting into something with more heat beneath it. "She was brilliant and she was generous and she was never once given what she was worth. I am not going to spend my life doing what she would have done. I loved her too much for that." The room was very quiet. Nathaniel did not move. He was doing what Clara had asked him to be there for, not intervening, not rescuing, just being present. Witness. Silas looked at his daughter for a long moment. Something moved through his face, not calculation, not this time. Something older and less comfortable. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly. "I've worked for what I have," she said. He nodded. Once, the nod of a man who has been told the truth and recognized it. He stood up. "I'll go," he said. "All right," she said. He picked up his hat from the table. At the door, he stopped. He looked back at her. "She would have been proud of you," he said. "Your mother?" Clara looked at him. "I know," she said. "She told me." He left. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Nathaniel said very gently, "Are you all right?" Clara sat very still for a beat. Then she let out a breath that was not quite a sigh, the kind of exhale that a person produces when they have been holding themselves together for something, and the something is finished. "I didn't expect him to say that," she said, "about my mother." "No, he was not." She paused. "He was not a cruel man. He was a man who did not know how to stay in a hard situation. There is a difference." She looked at her hands. He found her hard. After she was gone, he found the space she left even harder. So he left. She looked up. "I understand it better now than I did at 21. Does understanding it make it easier?" She thought about this with genuine consideration. "No," she said, "but it makes it smaller. It stops being the main thing." She looked at him. "Thank you for being here. You asked me to be here," he said. "I know." She looked at him with that full, unguarded attention, the composure there, but thinner now, after the hour she'd just had. "I don't ask for things I don't need." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. And then, because he was learning, because he was genuinely, effortfully learning, he said, "How is the cottage supply organization going?" She blinked. Then something happened in her face that he had seen only twice before, and had been both times quietly extraordinary. She almost laughed, not a full laugh, but the shape of one. "The northeast corner shelving needs to be 8 inches deeper than I originally planned," she said. "I'll tell Thomas. I already left him a note." "Of course you did." And they sat in the small receiving room in the aftermath of something hard, and it was the most natural moment they had shared, yet two people who had been through something together and had come out the other side still in the same room. Martha Greer came back the following Tuesday. And she brought a woman with her, a younger woman, 26, named Dottie, who had 2 small children and a husband who worked seasonal contracts and left her without income for months at a time. Dottie sat in the cottage and listened to Clara explain the basics of garment preservation with the focused attention of someone who is hearing something that matters and knows it. On Thursday, a third woman came. By the end of the week, there were 5. Agnes reported this to Nathaniel with barely contained delight. "They come in the mornings," she said. "Clara teaches for 2 hours, and then they practice on the estate linens she's given them." "She's paying them for the practice work." Nathaniel stopped. "She's paying them? Out of her own wages," Agnes said. "She said they need income to keep coming, not just the promise of future income." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. Then he went to Thomas. "Her wages," he said. "Double them, effective immediately." Thomas looked at him. "Sir, she is running a training program that is producing skilled labor for this county and doing it at her own expense, because she believes the women need immediate income to continue attending." He paused. "Double her wages. Tell her it's an estate adjustment for the expanded scope of her role. Don't tell her it's connected to the training payments." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "She will figure it out." "Yes," Nathaniel said, "she will. And when she figures it out." Nathaniel looked at him. "Tell her she's right." She figured it out in 4 days. She appeared at the study door on a Wednesday morning and knocked on the frame, and Nathaniel looked up and knew from the quality of her expression exactly where they were. "My wages." "Yes," he said. Thomas said, "Expanded scope." "Yes, you doubled them because of the training payments." He leaned back in his chair. He did not deflect. He had decided after the storage room proposal that deflection was a mechanism of the man he was not trying to be anymore. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "You could have just offered to fund the training directly." "I could have," he said, "and then it would have been my program. Funded by me, attached to the Whitmore name." He paused. "It's yours. Your wages are yours to spend as you choose." "I didn't fund anything. I compensated an employee appropriately for the scope of her actual work." The silence stretched. "You're getting better at this," she said. Something in his chest moved. "I have a demanding teacher," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The composure was there, but he could see through it now the way you see through glass clearly, without obstruction. He could see what was underneath it. What had been underneath it for weeks, carefully held, carefully managed, because she was a woman who had learned that careful management was how you kept yourself whole. "The cottage floor is finished," she said. "I know. Thomas told me. Martha Greer's work is excellent," she said. "She has a better eye for color matching than I do." "I didn't expect that. What will you do with it?" "Teach her to use it," Clara said. "Give her something to build on." She paused. "Dottie is slower with the technical work, but she is extraordinary with clients. She understands what people need before they say it." She paused again. "They are both extraordinary. They just needed a room and someone to take them seriously." Nathaniel looked at her. "Come to dinner," he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon? Not a formal dinner." "Not the dining room." He stood up. "Thomas makes a terrible pot of coffee and an excellent one of tea, and there is always food in the kitchen in the evenings. Come and eat dinner with me. In the kitchen, if you'd prefer it. Or the library. Wherever you like." He paused. "I want to hear about Martha Greer's eye for color and Dottie's way with clients, and I want to hear it sitting across a table from you without it being a report through Thomas." She looked at him for a long time. "That is not an arrangement," she said. "Or a condition. It is just dinner." Yes, she was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. She came to dinner that evening. They sat in the library, because the library had become, without either of them formally deciding it, the room where the most honest things got said in this house. Thomas brought food and tea and vanished with the specific tact of a man who understands his role in a larger story. They talked for 3 hours, not about the estate. Not about accounts, not about Philadelphia or Richmond or Margaret's signature or the cottage or the training program. They talked about her mother and the corner of the kitchen and what it felt like to hold something fragile and know exactly what it needed. They talked about his father and the brass plate on the church pew and what it felt like to inherit a name that contained mostly expectations and very little direction. They talked about being 12 years old and being 21, and being the person you decide to become, because the people around you have shown you, very clearly, the person you refuse to be. At some point in the second hour, without either of them noting the exact moment, the careful distance between them, the employer and housemaid architecture of their early conversations, finished dissolving. Not dramatically, just gone, the way morning mist goes when the temperature changes. Quietly and completely, he said, "I'm going to ask you again." She looked at him across the table. "Not now," he said. "Not tonight. I'm telling you that I will. So that you know it's coming and it's not another ambush with a ring in a storage room." He held her gaze. "And when I ask, I'm going to ask what you want, all of it. Not just whether you'll marry me, but what that would need to look like so that what you want and what I want can exist in the same life." He paused. "Because I have been a man who lived by his principles, and my principles were well constructed, but they did not leave room for anyone else's." He looked at her. "I want to leave room." Clara sat with this. She sat with it the way she sat with everything real, completely, without performing a reaction, letting it be what it was. "All right," she said finally. "All right, you'll listen when I ask?" "All right," she said, and there was something in her voice warm and clear and not managed at all. All right to all of it. Outside the library window, the Virginia summer dark had settled in, completely warm and cricket loud and vast, indifferent to the arrangements of people, but containing them anyway, the way the world always contains the things that happen inside it. Enormous and small at once, significant beyond any accounting. Thomas found them still in the library at 10 o'clock and announced with perfect composure that the kitchen fire had been banked for the night. Clara looked at the time. She stood up. She looked at Nathaniel across the library table, in the lamplight, and she said, "Good night." And he said, "Good night." And neither of them said the other thing, the full true thing, because they had both learned, one earlier than the other, but both by now, that the most important things arrive in their own time, and forcing them destroys what they could have been. But it was there, it had been there for a long time. And tomorrow was already coming. Tomorrow came the way important things always come, not announced, not dramatic, but with the particular weight of something that has been building long enough that when it finally arrives, you recognize it before you can name it. Nathaniel woke at 5 o'clock and lay in the dark for a full hour without moving, which was not something he did. He was a man who woke and rose and worked. He did not lie in the dark and think. But this morning he did, because there were things that needed to be true before he spoke them, and he needed to check each one the way Clara checked a damaged garment, carefully, completely, without wishful thinking about what he wanted to find. He asked himself the question she had asked him in the storage room. Why me? And he went through every answer he had given, and every answer he had thought but not said, and he tested each one against what he knew of himself, the real self, not the principled architecture he had constructed, but the man underneath it who had stood in a corridor for 20 minutes because a lamp was on, and someone was stitching a hem, who had gone to Philadelphia and thought about a housemaid instead of a consortium, who had burned a list of names over a candle because keeping it felt like the worst kind of dishonesty. Every answer held. He got up, he dressed, he went downstairs. Thomas was already in the hall, which was not unusual. Thomas was always in the hall. He had the particular quality of already thoroughness that Nathaniel had stopped questioning decades ago. "Where is she?" Nathaniel said. Thomas did not ask who. "The cottage," he said. "She arrived early. She does that now." Nathaniel nodded. He picked up his coat. "Sir," Thomas said. He stopped. Thomas looked at him with 40 years of accumulated dignity and the face of a man who has watched one family make the same mistakes across 3 generations and is watching, now, the first person in that line who appears to be doing something genuinely different. "Get it right," he said. Nathaniel looked at him. "I intend to," he said. He walked out. The cottage door was open. Because Clara left it open in the mornings when the weather was good, she had told Agnes it was for the light. But Agnes had quietly reported this to Thomas with the observation that it also meant you could hear anyone coming up the path, which meant Clara always knew who was arriving before they arrived. She knew it was Nathaniel before he reached the door. She recognized his footfall the way she had come, to recognize everything about the way he moved through this property deliberately, without wasted motion, but with a quality of attention that meant he was always aware of what was around him. She was at the work table. She did not turn around. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," he said. She turned then. He was in the doorway, not quite inside, his coat collar up against the early morning cool, and he looked like a man who had been awake for an hour thinking carefully about something, and had arrived at the end of the thinking. She set down what she was holding. "All right," she said. He came in. He did not sit down. He stood on the other side of the work table from her, and he looked at her the way he had learned to look at things completely, without the protective distance that he had once maintained between himself and anything that mattered. "I told you I was going to ask again," he said. "You did. I told you I would ask what you want. You did." "Then I'm asking," he held her gaze, "not just whether you'll marry me. Everything. What you need, what you're building, what you won't give up. What would have to be true for the rest of your life to be yours, and also mine." He paused. "Tell me." Clara looked at him for a long moment, then she told him. She told him about the cottage, and what she wanted it to become, not just a teaching space for 5 women, but something that could grow, that could reach women in other parts of the county who had no access to skills or income or the particular confidence that comes from making something well with your own hands. She told him she wanted the training program to be independent, not funded by the Whitmore estate as charity, but self-sustaining, generating enough from skilled work contracts to pay its teachers and support its students. She told him she wanted her name on it, not Whitmore. Bellamy, the name her mother had given her. She told him she would not give up any of that. She told him she was not afraid of his world of the county expectations and the social architecture, and the people who would look at a former housemaid beside a Whitmore heir and make the calculations that people in their position would inevitably make. She was not afraid because she had been seen as lesser than her actual worth her entire life, and she knew now, with absolute certainty, that their assessment was not the same thing as her value. She told him she wanted evenings, not formal dinners, not estate functions, just evenings, regular and unscheduled, where they could sit in the library and she could tell him about Martha's color instinct and Dottie's way with people, and he could tell her about the Philadelphia account management and his mother's ongoing recalibration, and where neither of them would be performing anything for anyone. She told him she wanted to be asked, always, her opinion, her preference, her assessment. Not consulted for approval. She was not interested in being managed, but asked genuinely as a person whose view mattered. She stopped. She looked at him. "Those are my terms," she said. "Not conditions, not a negotiation. This is what my life is and what it will continue to be. And what I need to know is whether there is room in yours for a life that is also completely mine." Nathaniel had not moved during any of this. He stood on the other side of the work table, and he looked at the woman he intended to spend the rest of his life with, and he said, "Yes. To all of it. You didn't think about it." "I've been thinking about it since 4 o'clock this morning," he said. "When you're ready to ask me my terms, I'll tell you. But right now I'm answering yours." He held her gaze. "The cottage stays yours. The program stays Bellamy's. The evenings are non-negotiable. I require them as much as you do. And your name," he paused, "your mother's name, your grandmother's knowledge. Everything that made you who you are, it stays." He paused once more, and his voice dropped to something quieter, something that was not a performance for the empty cottage or the early morning or anyone listening. "I don't want to acquire you, Clara. I want to build something beside you. Those are 2 entirely different things, and I finally know the difference." Clara stood very still. Something moved through her face, the last layer of the composure, the outermost one, the one she had been wearing since she was 15 years old, and decided that getting smaller was a choice she would not make. It did not break. It did not fall away dramatically. It simply became unnecessary. What was underneath it was not vulnerability. It was not uncertainty. It was just Clara, without armor, complete and clear-eyed and more real than anyone he had ever stood across from. Then yes, she said. The word was quiet. It was nothing like the no she had said in this same storage room weeks ago. That no had been a wall, necessary and exact. This yes was something else. It was a door open. Yes, she said again, as though she wanted it to be real in the air twice. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket. The ring was there. It had been there every morning for 2 weeks. He had carried it daily, not as a strategy, not as preparation, but because carrying it was a way of staying honest with himself about what he intended and what it needed to be worth. He set it on the work table between them. He did not hold it out. He did not place it on her hand. He put it on the table, in the space between them, and he looked at her and said, "My grandmother's." "You saved her dress. I thought that was appropriate." A pause. "You don't have to wear it if you'd rather not. It was her choice." "It should be yours." Clara looked at the ring. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked it up. She held it in her palm for a moment, the way she held fragile things, with complete attention, assessing it with the care of someone who understands that old things carry weight beyond their material. Then she put it on. She looked at him. He looked at her. And neither of them said anything for a full 10 seconds, because some moments are true enough that words are a reduction, and they both knew it. Then she said, "You mentioned terms." He almost laughed. He did not, but the shape of it was there. "I want an honest partner," he said. "Not a manager. Not a woman who runs my house. A partner who tells me when I'm wrong, because you are better at that than anyone I have ever met." He paused. "I want you to be in the library in the evenings, but I'm aware that's already your preference, so I'm not negotiating for very much." He looked at her. "And I want when we have children. If we have children, I want them to know that their father did not choose their mother because she was useful. I want that to be clear to them." Early Clara was very still. "Children," she said. "If we have them," he said carefully. "If you want them." She looked at him for a long moment. And then quietly, privately, in the early morning cottage with the door open, and the light coming in and no audience but the room itself, she said, "I think I do." He looked at her. She looked at him. "All right then," he said. Margaret Whitmore heard the news from Thomas at 9 o'clock that morning, in the form of a statement so compact that it contained everything she needed to know and nothing extraneous. "Mr. Whitmore has asked Miss Bellamy to marry him," Thomas said. "She has accepted." Margaret was at the sitting-room desk with correspondence in front of her. She set down her pen. She was quiet for a moment that had several things in it: the 30 years of imagining this announcement arriving differently, the image of Eleanor Hayes and Richmond Capital, the 2 conversations she had had with Clara in the East Corridor that had told her, both times, more than she had been prepared to hear. "Is she in the cottage?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret stood up. "I'll go to her." Thomas said nothing, which was its own form of approval. Margaret walked to the cottage alone, which was deliberate. She could have sent for Clara. She could have arranged a formal meeting in the parlor. She walked to the cottage because she understood, in the way of someone who has finally, after many years, understood something important, that going to someone is different from summoning them, and that difference is everything. She knocked on the open door. Clara turned from the work table. She read Margaret's face with the quick accuracy that Nathaniel had learned to rely on, and Margaret was only now beginning to appreciate. "Mrs. Whitmore," Clara said, "may I come in?" Clara stepped back from the work table. "Please." Margaret came in. She looked at the room, the order of it, the careful logic of the organization, the clean shelving and the stacked materials, and the 2 extra chairs that had appeared since the training sessions started. She looked at all of it with the attention of a woman who has been watching this estate for 30 years and knows exactly what things looked like before and what they look like now. Then she looked at Clara's left hand. She saw the ring. She was quiet for a full 5 seconds. "That was Catherine's," she said. "Yes," Clara said. "He told me. He kept it in the safe for 20 years, Margaret said. "He never showed it to anyone." She looked up from the ring to Clara's face. "Not even Eleanor." Clara said nothing. She waited with her usual completeness. Margaret took a breath. She was not a woman who found the next thing easy, and she did not perform ease with it. "I want to tell you," she said carefully, "that I have not made this simple for you." Since you arrived, she paused. I came to you in this corridor and I looked at you in the way that women look at things that seem to be altering the arrangements they have spent years managing. She met Clara's gaze. That was not fair. Clara looked at her. I spoke to my son about you, Margaret continued. More than once, in ways that I framed them as concern. They were also something else. She stopped. You have changed this house. Not superficially. In the way that things change when someone looks at them honestly and does what is actually needed instead of what is easiest. She looked around the cottage. He is different. He has been different since you arrived. Not easier, exactly, but more present, more like the person I believed he was before his father showed him that presence was a liability. She looked back at Clara. I did not see you clearly at the beginning. I am seeing you now. The cottage was very quiet. Clara looked at the woman who was about to become her mother-in-law, who had spent 30 years in a beautiful house being maintained rather than loved. Who had pushed her son toward Eleanor Hayes, not from cruelty but from the particular fear of a woman who has seen what happens when an estate's foundations give way. Who had signed the Philadelphia document and in doing so had chosen her son over her own certainty. He told me, Clara said carefully, that you cried in the hallway when he was 12 years old and called it nothing. Margaret went very still. He was not criticizing you, Clara said. He was telling me what it cost you, what you carried quietly for years. She paused. I recognize that kind of carrying. I have done it myself. She looked at the older woman steadily. I do not hold the early months against you. You were protecting what you had. That is not nothing. Margaret looked at her. And for the first time since Clara Bellamy had arrived at Whitmore Estate, Margaret Whitmore looked at this woman not as a disruption or a complication or a housemaid who had moved into territory above her station, but as the person her son had chosen and understood completely, without reservation, why. You will make him work for things, Margaret said. Not an observation. Yes, Clara said. Good, Margaret said, and she meant it completely. The news reached the county, the way news always reaches Virginia counties, through the servant networks first, then the merchant networks, then the social ones, each layer adding its own interpretation. By the end of the week, the story being told in the drawing rooms of the county's more prosperous families was that Nathaniel Whitmore had proposed to his housemaid, and she had initially refused him, and that he had spent 2 weeks giving her a cottage and doubling her wages before she agreed, and that the whole affair was either the most romantic thing that had happened in the county since the previous decade or the most scandalous, depending on the speaker's temperament and their outstanding relationship with the Whitmore family's social currency. Harriet Doyle, when she heard the full account from Agnes, was quiet for a long time. Then she said she refused him the first time, Agnes said. The first time, Harriet repeated. She was quiet again. Then, with the specific adjustment of a woman who has been wrong about something and is deciding how to handle it, she is not what I thought she was. No, Agnes said. What is she? Agnes thought about this with more care than a 17-year-old might usually be expected to bring to a question. She is exactly what she appeared to be, she said finally. From the first day, we just weren't looking right. Harriet was quiet for a long time after that. She found Clara in the main house corridor the following morning and said, without preamble and without warmth but with a clarity that was its own form of honesty, I misjudged you. Clara looked at her. I know, she said. I won't do it again. I know that too, Clara said, and that was that. The wedding was in October, when the Virginia summer had finally finished, and the air had the first edge of autumn in it. They married in the county church, the same church with the Whitmore brass plate in the east pew, the one Nathaniel at top sat in every Sunday for 30 years, looking at the view from above the congregation, and thinking about principle. It was a small ceremony, not because they were hiding anything, because they were not, but because neither of them had any interest in spectacle. Thomas was there. Agnes was there, in a dress she had clearly pressed 3 times and still found imperfect. Margaret Whitmore sat in the family pew and held herself with the composed dignity of a woman who has found something she thought was lost and is not quite ready to show how much it matters. Martha Greer and Dottie sat in the 3rd row, which was not traditional, and which no one remarked on because Thomas had arranged the seating, and Thomas's arrangements were not typically subject to public critique. Eleanor Hayes sent a gift. It arrived the morning of the wedding, a set of the finest linen Clara had ever seen, folded with obvious care, with a card that said only, "Excellently done." Both of you. Clara read the card twice and set it on the work table in the cottage, which was where she kept things that mattered. At the church, when the minister arrived at the words that made everything official, Nathaniel looked at Clara and Clara looked at Nathaniel, and what passed between them in that moment was not performance. It was recognition. The specific recognition of two people who have looked at each other clearly enough and long enough to know exactly who they are choosing, and exactly what that choosing costs, and exactly why it is worth it. He said, "I do." She said, "I do." And the minister pronounced them married, and Thomas allowed himself privately, invisibly, with the restraint of 40 years one moment, of something that was not quite professional satisfaction, but was considerably warmer. The Bellamy School opened in the North Cottage in the spring of 1820. By then it had 7 students and a waiting list. Martha Greer was its first official teacher, hired not as a favor, but because her color instinct and her patience with beginners were genuinely exceptional, and Clara had told her so plainly and paid her accordingly. Dottie managed the client contracts, which were real contracts, signed and binding, with women and families across the county, who had discovered that the Bellamy School produced the finest textile work available at any price. The school bore Clara's name, because she had made that clear from the beginning, and Nathaniel had understood it immediately. It was not a Whitmore enterprise, it was not charity. It was a business, small and exact and growing, belonging entirely to the woman who had built it in the room where she had always wanted to build something. Clara worked in it every morning. She taught, and she kept the accounts, and she trained Martha and Dottie and the 5 women who came after them, and she wrote letters to women in neighboring counties who had heard about it and wanted to know if they could come. She answered every letter. She said yes to everyone who was willing to work. Nathaniel managed the estate, which was solvent, now genuinely solvent. Not superficially so, because the Philadelphia arrangement was working the way documents that are honestly written tend to work when the parties involved are honest about what they need. The east quarter of the land had not been sold. The family records that Clara had saved from the burning carriage house were properly archived in the refitted east storage room, which was catalogued fully for the first time in the estate's history. The evenings were what she had asked for, regular, unscheduled, theirs. The library, most nights, tea that Thomas made and left without comment. Two people who had both been, in their different ways, and for their different reasons, very alone for a very long time, sitting across from each other and being, in the most ordinary and extraordinary sense, not alone anymore. On a Thursday evening in March, 8 months after the wedding, Clara looked up from her account ledger and said, "Dottie wants to open a second location in Fredericksburg." Nathaniel looked up from his correspondence. "Can she manage it independently?" "She can manage anything," Clara said. "She's been doing it quietly for months." "She's waiting for permission. Is she waiting for your permission or for the conviction that she doesn't need it?" Clara looked at him. "The second one," she said. "Then tell her she doesn't need it." Clara looked at him for a moment, with the specific expression she wore when he had said the right thing, and she was acknowledging it without making a ceremony of it. "I will," she said. She went back to her ledger. He went back to his correspondence. The fire settled in the grate. Outside the library window, the first warmth of the Virginia spring was beginning to push back against the winter, and the fields were greening at the edges the way they did every year, indifferent and patient, doing what they had always done. The last twist came in April, and it came not from creditors or social expectations, or the complicated history of who the Whitmore men had been, but from a woman named Ida Calloway, who arrived from Fredericksburg without warning one Tuesday morning and asked, at the servants' entrance, for Miss Bellamy. Thomas told her that Miss Bellamy was now Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Calloway absorbed this information with remarkable composure and said she would like to speak with her regardless. Clara received her in the cottage, because the cottage was where she received everyone who came on Bellamy school business, which was most of her business now. Mrs. Calloway was 62, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the upright precision of a woman who has been running a large household for so long that the competence has become structural. She sat down across from Clara and looked at the room, at the shelving and the organized materials, and the two student stations set up with their practice fabrics, with an expression that Clara recognized as the expression of someone looking at something they understand. "I came," Mrs. Calloway said, "because I heard what you built here. And because I want to know if I can send you a student." She paused. "My youngest granddaughter. She is 18. She has more ability with fabric than I've seen in 60 years of household management, and no one in her family knows what to do with it." She looked at Clara directly. "I do not want it wasted." Clara looked at her. "I also came, Mrs. Calloway added, more quietly, "because I wrote you that letter of reference 4 years ago, and I have wondered, since, whether it went to the right place." "It did," Clara said. Mrs. Calloway looked at the ring on Clara's left hand. "At the cottage. At the woman who had worked in her house at 21, and was sitting across from her now at 26 with a surety that 4 years ago had been a seedling and was now a tree." "Yes," she said, "I can see that. She sent her granddaughter the following Monday." The girl's name was Rose, and she had, as Mrs. Calloway had promised, a gift with fabric that was immediately apparent and would take years to fully develop. And she sat in the cottage on her first day, with the look of someone who has been led into a room that was made for them without knowing such rooms existed. Clara sat across from her and thought about the corner of a kitchen in Fredericksburg. About a mother working before sunrise and after dark in someone else's space. About a 15-year-old girl who decided that getting smaller was a choice she would not make. About a storage room at midnight, and a forgotten wedding gown, and a man who burned a list of 8 names and stood in the East Wing corridor for 20 minutes because a lamp was on. She looked at Rose across the work table and said, "Tell me what you already know." Rose told her, and Clara listened the way she listened to everything completely, without performance, with the full and unreserved attention of someone who understands that knowing what someone already carries is the only honest place to begin. Years later, people in the county would still tell the story. They would tell it at dinner tables, and in church doorways, and across the counters of merchant shops, and the version they told would vary depending on who was telling it, because stories do that, they carry the shape of the people who carry them. Some told it as a love story. Some told it as a story about an estate that should have failed and didn't. Some told it as the story of a housemaid who refused a proposal in a storage room and built a school in a cottage and changed the way a county thought about what women could build and own. All of these were true. Thomas Reed, in the last years of his service to the Whitmore estate, was occasionally asked by visitors to tell the story from the beginning. He always declined to tell it the way they expected it, the romance, the ring, the small Virginia church. He told it beginning with a storage room, at midnight, a cedar chest, and a woman with a lamp who found a forgotten wedding gown and decided it still mattered. That is where it started, he would say. Everything else followed from that. He was not wrong. Nathaniel Whitmore, who had once stood over his father's grave and sworn he would not become him, became instead something his father had never managed, a man who knew the difference between managing things and caring for them, who understood that the greatest thing he had ever built was not the solvent estate or the Philadelphia partnership or the reclaimed family records. It was a life with room in it. Room for 2 people, both complete, both chosen freely, building beside each other with the particular confidence of people who have looked clearly at what they want and said out loud, without flinching, to each other and to themselves. Exactly this, and Clara Bellamy, who had arrived at Whitmore Estate with 1 suitcase and a sewing box, and the absolute conviction that a person's worth was not determined by the space they occupied in someone else's household, Clara built what she had always intended to build. Not a life inside someone else's walls, her own, and it was by every honest measure exactly enough.